Chapter 1373. One of the most precious resources in the desolate ancient star ocean was the 100 heavenly spirit star beads. Each heavenly spirit star bead required thousands or even tens of thousands of years to nurture. When a cultivator carried a star bead with him or refined it into a magical treasure or artifact, it could produce a transformation effect and make it more convenient to gather spiritual chi. Among the materials that could assist in cultivation, it was the best choice. One of the most precious resources in the star ocean was the star ocean heavenly sand. Although it didn't seem like a lot, it was a great material for refining treasures. It was especially suitable for refining cauldrons, and other magical artifacts. It could improve the quality of the heavenly sand. In the process of refining elixirs, directly adding it as an aid could greatly increase the success rate of refining elixirs. Before the divine land, the only way to gather so much starry heavenly sand at once could be traced back to ancient times, when a human sovereign occupied the sea of stars. But even then, the value of such a large amount of starry heavenly sand was astronomical. With the current scale of the ancient royal dynasty, the starry heavenly sand in front of them could be distributed to every descendant of the ancient royal dynasty. Apart from the heavenly spirit star bead and the star sea heavenly sand, there were even more precious items. They were the most precious products of the desolate ancient star sea, 10 star remains from the star tomb. Although star remains were more valuable to the demon race, they were also of great help to human cultivators. Taking a step back, although the divine land and infinite wasteland were enemies, they had not completely cut off contact with each other. Even if the ancient dynasty did not use these 10 star remains, they could still exchange them for great benefits from infinite wasteland, far greater than what they had paid. Furthermore, there was no market for them, and the demon race would fight for them. Although the other sects, including the ancient imperial dynasty, could also enter the star sea with the permission of the celestial sect of wonders, in terms of gathering resources, how could they compare to the celestial sect of wonders, who had 4 star sea gates in their hands? And these were only the products of the star ocean. Apart from the treasures in the star ocean, there were even more treasures from the Ing Ocean, such as the condensed crystal and the purple condensed dew. This was especially true for a scene pearl. It was priceless, and it moved Shur Zongtong, Ji Wunrui, Sword Sovereign Skirich, and the others. This was a precious treasure from the Ing Ocean. In the long history of the heaven primordial world, it was known to have appeared less than 10 times. It could help Tao integration stage cultivators challenge the heavenly deterioration tribulation. It was common knowledge that no matter if it was an expert at the Tao integration realm or the last days realm, the most difficult and dangerous part of charging toward a higher realm was always the first tribulation. Only by surviving the first tribulation would one be considered to have entered the first tribulation stage, or perhaps the middle tribulation stage. Only then would one have a future. If one couldn't survive, they would die on the spot, and no one could save them. For cultivators, the most dangerous thing was that before taking the first step, almost no one could truly have a clear idea of what to do and be completely confident about it. Everyone had to take a certain amount of risk, which required great courage and determination. At such a time, they naturally had to try their best to increase their confidence and the possibility of success. No matter how carefully they planned, it was never too much. Otherwise, if they were careless, all their glory, long lives, and powerful strength would all turn into ashes. In the current divine land, although there were a limited number of experts at the Tao integration stage, there was no lack of experts with profound cultivation. They had been at the void return or Tao integration stage for many years, but there were still very few who had truly taken that step. In the history of the divine land, there was definitely no one who died when a Tao integration stage expert challenged the first tribulation. As for experts at the last days realm challenging the middle tribulation and the collapse of the great Tao, it was even more difficult and dangerous. The great sage, the Kunlun Dragon King, the great Phoenix Sage, and so on, which one of them wasn't a great demon in the last days realm? Shoichi Dashin, Tao Master Ching Yi, and Sword Sovereign Tiangang had been in the Last Days realm for many years, but they still couldn't take that step. After the ancient clan retreated to the ancient longevity world, an ancestor in the Last Days realm failed to challenge the Middle Tribulation and died. Although the Image Pearl was of no help for cultivators in the Last Days realm challenging the Middle Tribulation, it was of great help for cultivators in the Tao integration stage challenging the First Tribulation. Although the key still lay in oneself, one could never be too careful when it came to going through tribulations. Looking at the Image Pearl, the eyes of all the Tao integration stage cultivators present, including Gu Yuankai and Gu Cheng, flickered slightly. This included the experts who had just reached the Tao integration stage, such as Sword Sovereign Tong Tian, Great Chan Yu Bei Rong, Thunderous Sword Sovereign, and Vasi Sword Sovereign. Preparing for a rainy day and continuing to prepare had always started as soon as possible. However, some people had more thoughts in their hearts. Although everyone knows that Xianmin Tianzong's complete control of the Ying Sea will make their strength soar, it's only at this moment that a corner of the iceberg has been revealed. We have the most intuitive understanding. Xianmin Tianzong has obtained at least one or two of these image pearls recently. Xianmin Tianzong has a Tao integration stage guest elder, Blazing Sun Tao Master Zhuge Zhuge, and a Star Soul unification stage guest elder, Lu Yuan. The continuous extravagance made everyone dizzy. Next, there were many rare treasures in Xianmin Tianzong's betrothal gifts, including many Dharma treasure embryos. Later, when Duanmu Hong, the disciple of Xiao Yin Fun Tianya, came forward with a few gourds, the others immediately perked up. Those were obviously medicine gourds, and the things inside were obviously elixirs. The ancient royal dynasty was famous for elixir refinement. Since Xianmin Tianzong used elixirs as betrothal gifts, they naturally had to be the best elixirs. Otherwise, he would inevitably become a laughingstock. In fact, many years ago, Flame Emperor Xiao Yin had already proved that he was the best elixir refiner in the Divine Land, better than Tao Master Qingning of the Taishu Temple and Tao Master Spiritual Awareness Gu Yuan of the ancient royal dynasty. It was rumored that his master was the master of the Celestial Gate, Lin Feng, and his attainments in elixir refinement were above his eldest disciple. However, the master of the Celestial Gate almost never opened the furnace, so he could only exist in the legends. In addition to Xiao Yin, his junior brothers, Zhu Yi and Yang Qing, were also the top figures in the Divine Land in the Tao of elixir refinement. Even their disciples and successors, such as Tang Jun, Duanmu Hong, Yang Tai, Yixin Hui, Yixin Xuan, and the others, were also famous for their elixir refinement abilities. This made the audience naturally look forward to the elixirs that Xianmin Tianzong had hired. Duanmu Hong was tall and handsome. Now, he had also grown from the weak youth of the past into an adult. Unlike his master Tang Jun, Duanmu Hong had a gentle temperament and was courteous. Although he was not aggressive, as the third-generation head disciple of Fun Tianya of Celestial Sect of Xianmin, the name of Lord Yuanmi had long spread in the vast land of the Divine Land. Together with Yixin Hui, the third-generation head disciple of Qiantian Palace, and Lu Yilin, the third-generation head disciple of Nirvana Wonderland, he was listed as the successor who was best at alchemy among the third-generation head disciple of Xianmin Celestial Sect. Duanmu Hong was the first to offer the first gourd. After the people of the ancient royal dynasty received it, their expressions changed slightly. Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir. As Xianmin Tianzong's prestige and influence grew, all the experts, be in the Divine Land or Infinite Mainland, focused their attention on Xianmin Tianzong. They carefully observed and analyzed every little change in the internal affairs of Xianmin Tianzong. Any information that came out of Xianmin Tianzong, even if it was just a word or two, would similarly attract the attention of many parties, regardless of whether it was useful or not. Today, with their strength and status, Lin Feng and Xianmin Tianzong did not care about some non-core information being known by others. The names and effects of elixirs, such as the Heaven Spirit Replenishing Elixir, the 33 Heavens Fortune Elixir, and the Golden Elixir, gradually spread like wildfire and became widely known. Although they did not quantify the effects of the Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir with numbers like Lin Feng, most of the people present had heard of the Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir and knew that this elixir could actually enhance a cultivator's foundation. Such a powerful and precious elixir was naturally desired by many people, even if it had its limits. The encounter of Wang Lin, the third disciple of Lin Feng, the master of the celestial sect, back then had become a widely spread legend in the Divine Land, encouraging everyone who did not have an outstanding foundation to embark on the path of cultivation. The other human cultivation forces in the Divine Land had also begun to examine whether their previous standards of disciple recruitment were biased, resulting in many lost pearls in the ocean. Apart from foundation, it was difficult to test other qualities in advance. However, there was no doubt that the existence of the Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir could avoid this problem to a certain extent. At the same time, if a disciple really had potential in terms of comprehension and willpower, the Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir could also make up for the shortcomings of their foundation and improve to a higher level. As a force that had always been on good terms with Xianmen Tianzong, the ancient dynasty had been paying attention to the way they trained their disciples over the years. This time, Xianmen Tianzong used the Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir as a congratulatory gift, which was undoubtedly good news for many young disciples with ordinary foundation but outstanding potential. At the same time, it would also increase the number of talents in the ancient dynasty. There were a total of 36 Heaven Spirit replenishing elixirs that matched the number of celestial spirits. It could be said that it was an extremely large number. However, this was just the beginning. After the Heaven Spirit replenishing elixir, there were 36 more elixirs. There were a total of 3 types of elixirs, each with 12 elixirs. The number of elixirs made everyone's eyes widen. Needless to say, there were 12 life substituting elixirs. It was effective once in a person's lifetime. For 12 people to take it, in most cases, it was equivalent to having an extra life. This elixir was originally kept by the Taishu Temple, but the recipe had been lost. Now that there were so many life-substituting elixirs, the crowd could not help but guess that Xianmen Tianzong had already mastered the recipe of the life-substituting elixir. The appearance of 12 life-substituting elixirs at the same time undoubtedly shocked the crowd. Along with the life-substituting elixirs, there were also 12 dark sky golden elixir and 12 33 days fortune elixir. These 2 elixirs made the hands of the cultivators from the ancient dynasty who were in charge of receiving the gifts burn. Whether it was the dark sky golden elixir or the 33 days fortune elixir, they were all secret techniques of Xianmen Tianzong. Only Xianmen Tianzong possessed them. Their nature-defying effects had long been spread throughout the Divine Land. The former was beneficial for cultivators to gain enlightenment. If a foundation establishment cultivator were to consume it, there was a high chance that they could increase the grade of their beer. The latter also contained many great Taos of heaven and earth. It was beneficial for cultivators to understand the mysteries of Taos. If a cultivator below the advanced stage of Yuaniing consumed it, their cultivation would directly increase by 1 level. If a cultivator in the advanced stage of Yuaniing consumed it, it would greatly help in breaking through to the primordial soul stage. With such nature-defying effects, if any of the 2 elixirs were to enter China, it would cause a great stir. Chapter 1374. Ding of Shenzhou. Yinghai, Xinghai, Gu Cheng, and Gu Yuankai looked at each other and nodded. When Lin Feng visited the ancient longevity world for the first time, he gave the formula of the Supreme Treasure Wisdom Pill as a greeting gift. That wasn't even considered as a betrothal gift today. Without the ginseng fruit, he naturally couldn't refine the Supreme Treasure Wisdom Pill. However, for the ancient longevity world back then, the pill formula was immeasurable in other aspects and was even more useful than the pill formula itself. Compared to the astonishment of the others, the ancient emperor's emotions were much calmer. Their attainments in alchemy were undoubtedly much higher than those of other forces. They also had more dealings with Xianmin Tianzong in terms of alchemy and had a deeper understanding of Xianmin Tianzong's terrifying production in this aspect. In the ancient era, the ancient emperor had once ruled over the divine land and was also a top alchemist. During that era, the human emperor had also occupied the Qinghai. Be it Xia Huang or the ancient emperor himself, they had both refined a large number of top-notch medicines. Although the current Xianmin Tianzong didn't rule over the divine land, they naturally wouldn't be excluded from the exchange of resources in the divine land. They could easily obtain everything they wanted. In the previous war between the two worlds, the human race had achieved great results. Their sphere of influence had expanded into Tianhuang mainland and occupied many medium-class worlds and foreign dimensions previously controlled by the demon race. As the leader of the counterattack, Xianmin Tianzong had also gained a lot. The Yinghai, which had always been a mysterious and dangerous place in the past, had now completely fallen into Xianmin Tianzong's control. The rich resources in it were a huge treasure trove. Although the Yinghai was full of disasters and the Xian Sea was guarded by the dragon race, everyone could enter and leave the empty sea freely. This naturally included Xianmin Tianzong. From a certain point of view, the resources that Xianmin Tianzong could mobilize had already reached a new peak in the history of the human cultivation world in the divine land. And these raw materials fell into the hands of Xiao Yin and the others who were good at alchemy. With the support of Ding of Shenzhou, they could maximize their own use. Although Sword Master Tong Tian and the others had long known that Xianmin Tianzong treated his disciples generously, they only realized today that they had underestimated Xianmin Tianzong. He had always known that Xianmin Tianzong's current wealth was so rich that he could no longer look at it in the past. However, at this moment, he had the most intuitive understanding. In the war between the two realms, starting from the master of the celestial sect of wonders, Lin Feng, his personal disciples, Xiao Yin, Zhu Yi, and the others, and even the second-generation direct disciples, Tang Jun, Yang Tai, Han Yang, Zhou Yinsong, Dao Yuding, and even the third-generation direct disciples, such as Lian Huazhao, Meng Honglu, and Chun Fanga, let everyone know how powerful Xianmin Tianzong was. After that, the war against the great Zhou dynasty once again confirmed this point. Now, everyone present deeply felt that not only in terms of combat power, but also in terms of the accumulation of resources, Xianmin Tianzong was also worthy of being the #1 holy land in the divine land. Now that it was Lin Feng's first disciple, Xiao Yin, who was engaged, the meaning was even more extraordinary, and the betrothal gifts were especially generous. However, although for Xianmin Tianzong, they didn't even blink when they gave such a generous betrothal gift, the ancient dynasty couldn't take it lightly. For the ancient dynasty, this was undoubtedly a heavy gift. It was so heavy that Gu Jun and the others had already begun to modify the original dowry list in their hearts. Although Lin Feng, Xiao Yin, or even Zhu Yi and the others didn't care whether Xiao Zhan or had a dowry or not, the ancient dynasty couldn't ignore it. The ancient dynasty's national power naturally couldn't be compared with Xianmin Tianzong's family wealth. No one would ask them to return the dowry with the same amount as Xianmin Tianzong's betrothal gift, but if the difference was too great, it would undoubtedly be a matter of shame for the entire ancient dynasty. Gu Cheng turned to Gu Yuankai. Ninth uncle, although we don't know when Jin and the others will officially get married and send off the bride, we still need to prepare as soon as possible. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble you to open the cauldron and ensure the quality of the pills. Gu Yuankai nodded and said, of course. The lotus pill is only useful for our own people who cultivate the primordial way of longevity. So we should prioritize the longevity pill first. Xianmin Tianzong's disciples are all extremely talented, so they most likely won't be able to use it. But it's definitely not a problem to use it to exchange for resources with other forces, or their disciples' family members who consume can greatly extend their lifespan. Gu Yuankai looked at the gourd in Duanmu Hong's hand and narrowed his eyes. We need to increase the number of longevity pills to at least 24. We also need to increase the number of other pills. He paused for a moment. That's not right. the number needs to be increased. For things like the sight pearl, star remains, star sea, heavenly sand, and purple dew, the number of treasures of the same value that we can find will inevitably be slightly lacking. That's right, we'll ask His Majesty before confirming the specific number. Gu Chung nodded, then suddenly sighed and said, "Actually, compared to the 33 Heavens Fortune Celestial Pill and the mysterious sky Many Wonders Golden Elixir, the Life Substitution Heaven Pill was the one that gave me a shock. Although those two kinds of medicinal pills are miraculous and extremely rare, that is only to the outside world. To the celestial sect of Xian itself, it is a lot more abundant. After all, the pill formula is their own, and they also have the divine continent cauldron. As long as they can gather all the ingredients, they can open the furnace to refine pills. With Xiaoyan's attainments in the way of alchemy, he will not fail no matter what. But the life substitution heaven pill is different. It looks like Xianmin Tianzong has already restored the pill recipe. This is truly unexpected and admirable." Gu Yuankai nodded at the side. Back then, they had obtained the remnant recipe of the life substitution heaven pill. After deciding to lean towards Xianmin Tianzong, they had also provided the remnant recipe to Xianmin Tianzong. Over the years, the alchemy masters of the ancient royal court, led by Gu Yuankai, had also been diligently researching the remnant recipe of the life substitution heaven pill, seeking to restore it, and they had made some progress. But now it seemed that Xianmin Tianzong had already successfully derived the complete pill recipe. After all, during the longevity ancient world pill gathering, the number of life replacement heavenly pills that the Taishu Temple had lost to the celestial sect of Xiangate was only 3. Moreover, it was known that at least one of them had already been used up in the war between the two worlds. It is very likely that the master of the Celestial Gate has personally taken action, Gu Yuankai said softly. Gu Yuankai said softly, "In recent years, I've been exchanging alchemy with Xiaoyan. Although his attainments in this path have become increasingly profound, he should still be unable to restore the pill formula of the life substituting heavenly pill in such a short time." Gu Chung looked at Lin Feng and nodded slowly. The master of the Celestial Gate is truly a peerless man. The current emperor of Zhou, Liang Qian, laughed bitterly and turned to look at King Yin Liang, Liang Fu. "King Yin Liang, do I have an unmarried sister of the right age?" Liang Fu could not help but smile. "Your Majesty must be joking." Liang Qian shook his head. "Of course I'm joking, but I can't bring myself to laugh. Although the great Zhou dynasty was not as powerful as before, it would definitely not betray its daughter. If a disciple of Xianmin Tianzong was really betrothed, the great Zhou dynasty would definitely prepare a dowry of sufficient weight. However, with such a relationship, the relationship between Xianmin Tianzong and the great Zhou dynasty would definitely be closer. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if the celestial sect of Xian still did not interfere in the conflict between the great Zhou dynasty and the other powers, at the very least, when the great Zhou dynasty was on the brink of life and death, they might be able to help the great Zhou dynasty. At the very least, they would be able to preserve a few of their descendants. Liang Fu and Liang Qian had always had a good relationship. Back when Liang Pan treated Liang Qian coldly, Liang Fu had also taken care of him. After Liang Qian ascended to the throne, Liang Fu was also put in an important position. The Mahayana Grade Magic Treasure, the border-opening ship, had also chosen Liang Fu as its master under Liang Qian's persuasion. "Your Majesty, the position of the main concubine in the harem is still vacant." Liang Fu smiled and transmitted his voice. Liang Qian was so angry that he laughed. "Uncle Yin Liang, are you making fun of me?" Liang Fu sighed softly. "I don't dare." Liang Qian also stopped smiling and said indifferently, "I understand what Uncle Yin Liang means, but a story like Emperor Yin and Lord Qing Yi is something that can only be encountered by chance. Martial Immortal Lord and Sword Immortal Lord are both focused on attaining the supreme Great Tao." Liang Fu nodded in agreement. Moreover, they do not need the support of Tao companions. Even if they become Tao companions, they will most likely support each other. In this way, if they do not know each other well, I'm afraid they will not choose Tao companions, let alone become husband and wife. He paused for a moment and looked at Liang Qian hesitantly. Liang Qian seemed to know what he was thinking and smiled. Xianmin Tianzong is powerful. If there are no major accidents, with the passage of time, its momentum will continue to grow. Even if I take a step back and ask for the second generation, Xianmin Tianzong, it will not be a disgrace to the country. Hearing this, Liang Fu did not say anything. Even if it seemed like it was a disgrace to the Great Zhou Empire, it was not a big deal. Back when the Great Zhou Empire had yet to rise up, it was just a small kingdom by the border of Great Qin. But later, the Great Zhou dynasty grasped the opportunity and grew into a prosperous dynasty that was separated from the Great Qin dynasty. Who could predict what would happen in the future? What was important was the present. Only by grasping the present could one seek the future. Liang Qian also turned to look at Liang Fu. But for the second generation, Xianmin Tianzong, how is their situation different from Martial Immortal Lord and Sword Immortal Lord? Liang Fu nodded silently. The others were shocked by the generosity of the celestial sect of Xianmin, as well as the deep and bottomless reserves hidden behind it. The people of the ancient imperial dynasty were thinking about how to return the gift. As the person who caused this wave, Lin Feng smiled calmly and said, I've made a fool of myself in front of fellow Gu and fellow Taoists. This last betrothal gift will be personally presented by my disciple. Everyone at the scene, including Gu Jun, was slightly shocked. There were so many treasures in front of them, but it was still not everything. There was still one last thing. How precious would this item be? Everyone's eyes could not help but look at Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan opened his palm. A cluster of golden flames condensed in the center of his palm, flickering with red and blue colors. Isn't this the Nanming Li fire? The ancient dynasty has the Li fire god technique. The people were not disappointed. Instead, they were even more curious. Chapter 1375. The foundation of the ancient emperor's lineage was the primordial way of longevity. It deduced the true meaning of longevity, boundless, endless, and full of vitality. However, just like the primordial demon sect, Supreme Scripture was the primordial demon scripture, which included the Avicii scripture and other branches. The primordial way of longevity was also all-encompassing. One of the branches was called the Li fire god technique. With the help of a fire seed, one could cultivate one of the 7 great true fires in the world, Nanming Li fire. The Nanming Li fire was undoubtedly incisive when used in fights of magical powers, but another well-known and unique use was that it was the most suitable firepower for refining pills and refining weapons. Since the ancient emperor, the ancient clan had always controlled Nanming Li fire, and they were famous for alchemy and crafting. Of the 7 great true fires in the world, Xianmin Tianzong had all of them. Lin Feng's first disciple, the master of Funtian Cliff, Yan Emperor Xiao Yan, was famous for controlling many kinds of true fires. True fire was one of the most explosive forces in the world. When they were in the same furnace, there would be no sympathy at all, and they would only fight to the death. Xiao Yan was the only one in the world who could control several types of true fires at the same time. Even the disciples of Funtian Cliff could cultivate more than one type of true fire at the same time by practicing his burning sky technique, but they all had their limits. So far, there was no one like Xiao Yan who could gather all the true fires in one body. Nanming Li fire was one of the 3 true fires that Xiao Yan had mastered the earliest. Xiao Yan is an expert in both pill refinement and weapon refinement. Even if he didn't have the Nanming Li fire, his pill refinement skills would still be able to suppress the entire divine continent, being hailed as the #1 divine hand of the current generation. But the Nanming Li fire still played an indelible role in the process of his growth in studying the path of pill refinement. Furthermore, he was also the strongest among the direct disciples of the Mystic Gates sect Master Lin Feng in the Tao of artifact refinement. The Nanming Li fire was even more so. Tracing back to the source, Xianmin Tianzong and Xiao Yin obtained the Nanming Li fire because Xiao Zhen secretly passed the Nanming Li fire seed and the ancient emperor's Li fire divine art to Xiao Yin. Because the Li fire god technique was a Dao technique of the ancient emperor, Xiao Yin combined it with the burning sky technique and analyzed the Nanming Li fire. He created a Dao technique of the Nanming proper technique and taught it to his disciples. Whether it was the Nanming proper technique or the Li fire divine technique, they could all be used to cultivate the Nanming Li fire. At this moment, Xiaoyan opened his palm and revealed the Nanming Li fire. The onlookers were confused. However, as the cultivators of the ancient dynasty stared at the flickering red and blue light and the bouncing golden flames, their faces gradually changed. First, it was the current ancient emperor, Gu Jun. Then, Gu Yuankai and Gu Cheng also saw the problem. Next, the eyes of Gu Peng and the other essence soul powerhouses of the ancient dynasty lit up. Everyone looked at each other. Gu Peng looked at Gu Yuankai and Gu Cheng hesitantly. Xiaoyan used this Nanming Li fire to develop a Dao technique, but it's not Xianmin Tianzong's Nanming proper technique. It's more like our dynasty's Li fire god technique, but it's not the same. Gu Yuankai took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. It's different. It's more profound than our dynasty's Li fire god technique. Gu Peng and the others trembled slightly. They could vaguely feel it, but they couldn't be completely sure just by watching. At this moment, hearing Gu Yuankai's words confirmed their guesses. They couldn't help but be even more shocked. Gu Cheng felt the power of the flames and nodded. Ninth Imperial Uncle is right. Compared to our dynasty's original Li fire god technique, it's a step further. Gu Peng murmured, "This gift is really indescribable." The ancient emperor's inheritance was relatively complete. From ancient times until now, over the long years, the clan could be said to have produced many powerful cultivators. The various techniques in the primordial great way of longevity, including the Li fire god technique, were naturally refined and perfected by generations of powerful cultivators of the ancient emperor. The flaws that could be made up for had been made up for, and the possibilities for improvement had also been improved. At this point, if one wanted to advance further, it would undoubtedly be much more difficult. Moreover, the further one advanced, the more difficult it would be. Every little bit of improvement was precious. And now, the Li fire god technique, evolved from the Nanming Li fire, and Xiaoyan's palm was undoubtedly an improvement on the original Dao technique of the ancient emperor's inheritance. The weight of it was self-evident. If it's just the Li fire god technique, then it's fine. Gu Cheng glanced at Gu Peng and said telepathically, "The key is the primordial great way of longevity." Hearing this, Gu Peng's body shook again. If it wasn't for the fact that he was also a powerful cultivator of the void return level, his body might even be trembling uncontrollably. Xiao Zhen only taught Xiao Yin the Li fire god technique, and the primordial great way of longevity did not leak out. But Gu Cheng, Gu Peng, and the others all knew that Xianmin Tianzong had the ancient heavenly gate's grand Jiutian divine sword Dao inheritance. At the same time, one of the ancient heavenly gate's 9 treasures, the Tsangtian Dao Jian, was currently in Xianmin Tianzong. And in the grand Jiutian divine sword, the sword intent of the Dongfang Tsangtian sword was the sword intent of the ancient emperor's inheritance, and it was also the sword Dao that comprehended the primordial great way of longevity. Although it was different from the primordial great way of longevity, it pointed to the same Dao. Xianmin Tianzong might not be able to deduce the primordial great way of longevity with the sword intent of the Dongfang Tsangtian sword, but it was not impossible to touch the Dao of the same origin. Gu Cheng, Gu Peng, and the others thought about the karma debate in the past. Gu Peng calmed himself down and frowned. He then asked, "But we didn't feel the Dao feedback when we were cultivating." Gu Cheng said slowly, "This is Xianmin Tianzong's thoughtfulness. Today's Li fire god technique is just a prelude to ask for our own opinion. If we want them to help us deduce and improve the primordial great way of longevity, then they will help us. They might not even need us to provide the original version of the primordial great way of longevity. And improving the primordial great way of longevity is the most important gift on Xianmin Tianzong's list of betrothal gifts. If we are unwilling, then they naturally won't force us, but their intentions are still there. Gu Peng looked at Lin Feng, who was sitting there silently and calmly. Then, he looked at the Nanming leaf fire in Xiao Yan's hand. The leaf fire god technique is different from the primordial great way of longevity after all. The latter is much more profound. Can Xianmin Tianzong? At this point, Gu Peng gradually could not continue because he recalled the karma debate. Gu Peng could not help but sigh. This is really generous. Gu Qing also nodded. That's right. This is indeed generous. If it were any other betrothal gifts, the ancient dynasty could still think of a way to return the favor. However, this betrothal gift was simply too important. The overall improvement of the primordial great way of longevity would not only benefit the cultivators of the ancient dynasty, including Gu Jun. Even the longevity lotus seed of creation might benefit. Gu Peng and the others, even Gu Cheng and Gu Yuankai, would benefit. When one reached the realm of Gu Jun and the longevity lotus seed, it was destined to become increasingly difficult to improve. Any gains would be extremely precious. While the ancient dynasty was moved by this generous gift, they also felt that it was a hot potato. In comparison, the awkwardness of relying on others to improve their Tao techniques was insignificant. Gu Peng had a slightly strange expression. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. Xianmin Tianzong, are you trying to make us believe that we are selling our daughters? Gu Cheng scolded jokingly. How can you make up your own niece like this? The big shots of the ancient clan felt a mixture of pain and happiness at the moment. As for the cultivators of the other forces who were watching the ceremony, they were still somewhat confused. The sect master of the Mount Shu Sword sect, Ji Wenrui, and the sect master of the Purple Cloud Dao sect, Dao Master Thundercloud, were slightly moved. They stared at the Nanming leaf fire in Xiao Yan's palm and fell into deep thought. Both of their sects had been passed down since ancient times. They had experienced the era when the ancient emperor ruled the divine land, so they knew more about the ancient emperor's orthodoxy than others. There were a large number of ancient books in their sections. However, they naturally could not clearly distinguish the mystery of the fire god technique deduced by the Nanming leaf fire in Xiao Yan's palm like the experts of the ancient dynasty. However, they could vaguely see that Xiao Yan was not simply displaying the Nanming leaf fire, but was using the true fire to deduce the secret art. At this time, it was naturally impossible to ask Gu Jun and the others to give advice and comment on such a secret art. Thinking of this, Ji Wenrui and Dao Master Thundercloud also thought of the karma discussion in the past. Their expressions suddenly became interesting. And at this time, Xiao Yan bowed toward the people of the ancient imperial dynasty, saying with a smile, I cultivated the Nanming leaf fire back then and benefited from your clan. Now that I've made some progress, take it as a token of my appreciation. Please don't laugh at me. Hearing this, the others gradually reacted at this moment. For a moment, they were all shocked. They looked at Xiao Yan and Lin Feng, the master of the celestial sect of wonders, who was sitting there. More and more people began to gradually associate the fire god technique with the ancient way of longevity. Then they gradually thought of their own Tao art. For a moment, everyone's mood became complicated. They were hesitant, and yearning. After the previous karma discussion, the other sects in the divine land were in chaos for a while. They all had different opinions and were uncertain. Since then, nothing similar happened. As time passed, although no one forgot it, the impact gradually settled. However, this settlement would not dissipate. Even the slightest movement would cause waves again. And now, another example was likely to appear in front of them, which made it difficult for them to calm down. Everyone hoped that their Tao art could reach a higher level and break through the shackles of the past. If others improved and they stayed where they were, it would be equivalent to regressing. At this time, Lin Feng looked towards Gu Jun, smiling unhurriedly, saying, I've let fellow Taoist Gu see a joke, please don't take offense to the abruptness. This last betrothal gift of mine has other mysteries. It's related to the matter we're going to discuss later. How could Lin Feng not understand the principle of great kindness and great enmity? After all, the ancient dynasty was not his subordinate. Gu Jun's expression was calm. He also smiled and shook his head. Master, the celestial sect of wonders is too serious. No matter what, we are grateful. Chapter 1376. Since the establishment of Xianmen Tianzong, although there had been occasional killings, they had never conquered other forces with the purpose of subduing them. Today, in the Divine Land, although Xianmen Tianzong occupied a transcendent position, and there were also small forces such as Tianwai Mountain that had clearly submitted to them, but it was others who took the initiative to approach them. Xianmen Tianzong would not take the initiative to suppress and conquer them. Today, Xiaoyan's coming to Longevity City to give the betrothal gift was undoubtedly a joyous occasion. However, Xianmen Tianzong's generous betrothal gift was seen by some people, and it was inevitable that they had other thoughts. For example, did the master of Xianmen's sect, Lin Feng, and his subordinate, Xianmen Tianzong, suddenly change their minds and begin to put all other forces in the Divine Land under their own strong control? At this moment, the betrothal gift was completely beyond everyone's expectations. Would it be a means of coercion, and first using peaceful means before using force? Xianmen Tianzong's first target was the most powerful active force in the Divine Land, the ancient dynasty. However, if the celestial sect of wonders really had such a plan, it would not be wise enough. After all, whether it was the ancient imperial dynasty or the other active human clan forces, they were all forces that were on good terms with the celestial sect of wonders. And the real stumbling block on their road to supremacy was actually Taishu Temple, which had been keeping a low profile and biding its time all these years. Although Xianmen Tianzong had been overthrown from the supreme position in the Divine Land, Taishu Temple was still undoubtedly the second largest force in the Divine Land. Even if Xianmen Tianzong carried out a war of annihilation, the result of attacking Baiyun Mountain by force was unpredictable. Even if they could win, the price they had to pay might not be something they were willing to bear. Relatively speaking, if Xianmen Tianzong really wanted to dominate the Divine Land and rule all living beings, the first target of Mount Shu Sword Sect was more suitable than the ancient dynasty. Thinking of this, everyone felt that their previous guess was not accurate. Therefore, they looked at Lin Feng and his disciples and felt even more puzzled. On the other hand, the sect leader of the Mount Shu Sword Sect, Ji Wenrui, suddenly thought of something. Gu Jun sat on the main seat with a calm expression. After a slight fluctuation in his gaze, he calmed down. He seemed to have some conjectures in his heart. Your sect is really full of talented people. Gu Jun changed the topic. He looked at Duanmu Hong and the others and said with a smile, "The last time I saw this little friend was when Sect Master Lin first visited the world of immortals. Now, I can already see the extraordinary scene in the future." Lin Feng smiled and said, "The juniors still need to temper themselves. Fellow Taoist Gu is too polite." Xiaoyan put away the Nanmingli fire and sat down again. The people from the ancient dynasty didn't ask any more questions. Based on Gu Jun's previous reaction, he had basically agreed to accept Xianmen Tianzong's help. However, things like figuring out and deducing Dao techniques would naturally have to wait until after the ceremony to discuss the specific details. After Xianmen Tianzong gave the betrothal gifts, the cultivators from the ancient dynasty accepted the pills, treasures, and many other gifts. Both sides performed other formalities, and Xiaozhen also appeared in front of everyone. Although she and Xiao Yan were still the young among the young in the cultivation world, they were both experts who had reached the primordial spirit realm. Although they accepted the betrothal according to the secular etiquette, they didn't mind showing themselves in front of others. The two of them stood together like a pair of lovers. Naturally, they also received many praises from the cultivators from other forces. Xiao Yan gently held Xiao Zhan'er's hand and said with a low smile, This is the second most glorious moment in my life. It's even more glorious than when Master gave me the title after the war between the two worlds ended. Xiao Zhen also revealed a smile on her face and nodded her head. She also knew about the moment when Xiao Yin was number one in his heart. It was many years ago when Xiao Yin was only a 15-year-old boy. At that time, he was at the lowest point of his life. But it was also at that time that he met his current master, Lin Feng, and became Lin Feng's disciple. In Xiao Yan's heart, that was the most glorious moment in his life. It was far more glorious than any time when he traveled the world and shocked the entire divine land. Xiao Zhen had long known this thought in Xiao Yan's heart. At this moment, when she heard what Xiao Yan said, she was not unhappy, but deeply agreed. Although she firmly believed in her feelings for Xiao Yan, and even more firmly believed that they would eventually be together, the road between them could be so smooth, and they could decide to spend the rest of their lives together so early. Wasn't it because of Lin Feng who stood behind Xiao Yan? For a long time, Lin Feng had given preferential treatment to the ancient dynasty. This time, when he came to propose marriage, the wealth of the betrothal gifts shocked the entire divine land. In the entire history of the human cultivation world, even back to the era of the ancient emperors, few people could compare. Back then, someone once joked that Xiao Yin and the others were not the disciples of Lin Feng, the master of the Xianmen sect, but were simply godsons and goddaughters. Naturally, no one dared to say such a joke in front of Lin Feng, but Lin Feng himself almost confirmed these rumors. And he himself obviously didn't care about it. Xiao Yin and Xiao Zhen, who both turned their heads around to look, seeing that Lin Feng is similarly looking at them with a smile. Looking at his eldest disciple, Lin Feng felt a lot of emotions in his heart for a moment. Unexpectedly, the appearance of Xiao Yin when he first met appeared in front of his eyes. He was dressed in black, had delicate features, but was stubborn and courageous. He was at the lowest point of his life, and his entire person had become cold and stern. There seemed to be a ball of raging fire hidden under his cold and stern appearance, a young man who could explode at any time. When Lin Feng saw him at that time, he was only concerned about his potential value that met the standard of a disciple set by the system. He was concerned about whether his mission could be completed. He was concerned about how great it would be for this talented young man to become his disciple, who had become useless and had his marriage broken off. He was concerned about how great it would be to become Lin Feng's disciple. He was concerned about how stressful it would be to be the grandfather of such a person. Lin Feng laughed in his heart and said, "Xiao Yin, now you're really getting a promotion and a raise, becoming the general manager, becoming the CEO, marrying a fair, rich, and beautiful woman, and walking towards the peak of your life. Aren't you a little excited? Oh, forget it. I won't tease you anymore." At this moment, when Lin Feng looked at Xiao Yin, there was only peace and joy in his heart. He was happy for his disciple. The face of the young man in his memory kept changing, and finally, it overlapped with the image of the handsome young man in front of him. He smiled and nodded at Xiao Yin and Xiao Zhen, and Xiao Yin and Xiao Zhen also smiled. As the host, Gu Jun also stood up and personally led Xiao Yin and Xiao Zhen to return the greeting, thanking everyone who came to watch the ceremony. Sword Venerable Flowing Light looked at Xiao Yin, and his heart was at peace. Standing beside him, Purple Cloud Ancestor was also thinking about how Xiao Yin had displayed the Fire Divine technique just now. As for Xiao Yin himself, he was completely convinced. He turned his head to look at the other side. Behind Sword Venerable Flowing Light stood two girls, one in front and one behind. They were both dressed in white. One was full of heroic spirit, and the other was quiet and dignified. They were Sword Venerable Flowing Light's direct disciples, Tao Yao Yao and Murong Yinran. Murong Yinran looked at Xiao Yin and Xiao Zhen, and her expression was also calm, without any fluctuations. She even teased Tao Yao Yao, "Senior sister, did you draw the stroke of the 8 characters between you and God Lord He Luo?" Tao Yao Yao stood there, and her whole person seemed to be one with heaven and earth. Her body flashed like flowing light. Not long ago, she had just successfully proved her primordial spirit path and became another primordial spirit realm great sword cultivator of Celerita's sword sect, besides her master sword venerable flowing light. In the past, because of fighting with others, her golden elixir cracked, and she, who had wasted hundreds of years, had been cultivating hard these years and finally shone again. Her sword energy soared into the sky, and she even surpassed Purple Cloud Ancestor, Chinai Ancestor, and many other seniors, breaking through the barrier between heaven and man. Tao Yaoyao was not angry when she heard that. She curled her lips and said with a smile, "Don't joke with hearsay. Do you believe that I won't tear your mouth? But if you didn't break the engagement back then, who knows what would happen today?" Murong Yinran smiled slightly. "If I didn't break the engagement, we wouldn't be together. Moreover, that's all in the past, and it's gone with the wind." Tao Yaoyao smiled. "Cultivate hard. This is the path of life that you can only walk by yourself. You can only reap rewards by working hard, and you don't have to rely on others for these rewards." Murong Yinran smiled. "Yes, I will listen to Senior Sister's teachings." When the engagement ceremony ended successfully, for most of the audience, especially the junior disciples, the things that were more relevant to them just began. To be able to witness the engagement ceremony of Emperor Yin and see the big scene of heroes gathering, for the young cultivators, it was undoubtedly an increase in their experience, and getting to know each other was also a great opportunity to expand their social network. Of course, since there were old grudges between them, it was inevitable that they would feel a little awkward when they met. In a longevity city, there would be a grand spell conference held together by Xianmin Tianzong and the ancient imperial court, and it was a chance for them to show themselves and hone their magical skills. The junior cultivators who performed outstandingly in this spell conference would receive the rewards prepared by Xianmin Tianzong and the ancient imperial court. The first few winners could even pass through the gate of the star Sea and enter the desolate ancient star Sea to be baptized by the primeval starlight. In addition to the spell conference, Xianmin Tianzong and the ancient imperial court would unite to recreate the scene of the ancient times and hold a grand elixir conference. After the ancient times, although elixir conferences were often held in the Divine Land, they were not as grand as before in terms of scale and momentum. However, this time, it was jointly held by Xianmin Tianzong and the ancient imperial court, and it immediately attracted everyone's interest. Previously, Xianmin Tianzong had given many elixirs as betrothal gifts, which made everyone even more excited. In addition to the competition of elixirs, the elixir conference was also an important occasion for cultivators to trade and exchange. It brought many opportunities for everyone to exchange for the elixirs they liked, and it also broadened their horizons. For a time, the atmosphere in the longevity city was flourishing, and it was extraordinarily lively, which was an eye-opener for the junior cultivators. In the spell conference and the elixir conference, big shots like Lin Feng and Gu Jun naturally silently watched and commented. As for people like Dao Master Thundercloud, Sword Master Tong Tian, and Shi Zong Tong, their attention was also focused on what Xianmin Tianzong had revealed. Ancient Emperor Gu Jun was also concerned about what Lin Feng had mentioned. Chapter 1377. According to the tradition of the human cultivation world in the Divine Land, Dharma gatherings like this were mainly meant to test the young cultivators' current cultivation and future development potential to increase their experience. Therefore, they were usually held between cultivators of the Golden Elixir period and the Foundation Establishment period. For Lin Feng and the others, battles of this level were naturally difficult to catch their attention. Those who had outstanding juniors also thought highly of their potential. Among them, the ones who attracted the most attention were undoubtedly the descendants of Xianmin Tianzong. Any one of them would leave a deep impression on the spectators. The reason they attracted the attention of others, apart from their strength, was undoubtedly because of Xianmin Tianzong himself. There had always been an old saying that a genius who died prematurely was not a genius. No matter how much potential one had, if that potential could not be transformed into true strength, it was all in vain. In the past, the dual-pupiled Shi Tianyi, who was killed by Huang's heavenly emperor Shi Tianhao, Liangyin, the Marquis Jing Huan, who was killed by Yin Emperor Xiao Yin, and Lei Jie, the dragon steed of the Lei family, who was killed by Tang Jun, were all outstanding talents of their time. They were expected to become legends of their generation. But now, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Even if someone remembered them, they would only leave behind a sigh. However, the group of genius disciples of Xianmen Tianzong had the support of their own sections. While the possibility of them dying prematurely was not completely zero, it was undoubtedly reduced to the lowest. At the same time, the possibility of their deep potential being completely unearthed was raised to the highest. In this way, the possibility of them growing into true powerhouses was naturally extremely high. The young talents who stood out in the Dharma gathering today were very likely to become powerhouses in the future, and not too far in the future. Dao Yuding, Zhou Yunsong, Ing Luoza, Lin Tong, and the others at the Kunlun Mountain Dharma gathering in the past were undoubtedly examples. Therefore, now that the outstanding performance of the junior disciples of Xianmen Tianzong was naturally in the eyes of other forces, they were all marked and paid close attention to them. However, for the young talents of other forces, a single comment from Lin Feng and the others was enough to benefit them greatly and benefit them for the rest of their lives. On the other hand, the S and Soul big shots paid more attention to the exchanges at the elixir meet. On one hand, although the attainments in alchemy were not completely related to the cultivation realm of a cultivator, relatively speaking, the top alchemy masters were mostly concentrated in the primordial soul realm. The highlight of the elixir gathering, other than helping the younger cultivators advance, was usually carried out among the primordial soul realm cultivators. The rare and precious panaceas that were rarely seen on normal days were naturally the most likely to appear in the elixir gathering that was jointly organized by Xianmen Tianzong and the ancient dynasty. Many of the panaceas were highly sought after even by the strongmen of the primordial divinity realm. Even if they could not use them themselves, their disciples might need them. On the other hand, the development of alchemy didn't seem to have much influence, but it had a long history. It often had an immeasurable influence on future development, and it didn't just affect individuals. If a certain sect came up with a new elixir, it would also attract the attention of others. They would evaluate it and predict the changes that might occur in the long term. Crossing Flame Pill, the sect master of the Blaze Sword sect, the venerable swordsman of the Blaze Sword sect, looked at the type of panaceas that Xianmen Tianzong's third generation head Duanmu Hong displayed, his gaze moving. The venerable swordsman of the constellation who was sitting beside him faintly smiled. This crossing flame pill of Xianmen Tianzong helps cultivators who train in fire elemental spiritual energy, even absorbing true vicious flames into their body to train. It can give rise to the effects of promotion and protection, reducing the danger and increasing the efficiency. The disciples of Xianmen Tianzong Fentinya will basically all choose one of the 7 great true fires to train in. The more outstanding ones will even choose more than one. The development of this crossing flame pill will undoubtedly benefit the disciples of Fentinya as a whole. And in the world, other than the 7 great true fires, which are the strongest firepower, there are also other spiritual fires and many fire elemental spells that all have a huge effect on cultivators. For example, the ancient dynasty cultivators who train in the Nanmingli fire, the reincarnation sect cultivators who train in the Red Lotus karmic fire, etc. The Blaze Sword sect is a sect of the sword, using the sword to establish their path, using sword chi and sword intent to evolve into raging flames, refining flames to aid their own training. They can also use this pill. Gu Jun glanced at Duanmu Hong, nodding his head and saying, "This is a pill that he figured out himself?" Sure enough, the younger generation will surpass the older. Lin Feng smiled, saying, "There is still room for him to continue improving and strive for perfection. Coming to the pill gathering this time is also to let him experience the pill refining skills of fellow cultivators in the world in order to exchange and improve." The Emperor of Qin, Shi Zongtong, said, "Sect Master Lin, it is enough for you and the Flame Emperor to guide him. Both of you are top pill masters in the world." Lin Feng said, "You flatter me, fellow Shi. No matter if it is the path of cultivation or the path of pills, they are both as vast as the ocean. Not mentioning Yuan Long, even me and Xianyan are the same." Shi Zongtong smiled faintly. Sect Master Lin's words are indeed reasonable, but it makes us even more ashamed. Lin Feng shook his head, smiling, saying, "What are you saying, fellow Shi? My master and disciple figuring out the art of pill refining is just a personal interest. We have embarrassed ourselves in front of you fellow cultivators." He sat on the large chair, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest as he leisurely said, "I believe that fellow cultivators should already know that one of the 7 seas of Tianyuan, the Spirit Ocean, is about to reopen." Gu Jun, Shi Zongtong, Jiwenrui, Bei Rong, First Chanyu, Dowlord Thundercloud, and the other big shots all nodded their heads. That's right, we already know. After the war between the two worlds ended back then, there was an uproar in the Tianyuan world that the Spirit Ocean of the 7 seas of Tianyuan was about to reopen. At the same time that the Enchantress released the news, he also spread out a portion of the secret keys that could enter the Spirit Ocean, causing a huge uproar in the vast Tianyuan continent, causing many parties to fight over them. Amongst those present, there were also people who participated, but the secret keys were rare and it was not easy to fight over them. Very few people had any gains. Furthermore, the power above the Xianhai, Ing Sea, Netherworld Sea, Star Sea, and Empty Sea, it was as if it was everywhere. Nowhere it couldn't be found. Xianmen, Tianzong, Taishu Temple, and the Yuta race had already taken the initiative. All sorts of rumors, real and fake, circulated endlessly. In addition to Lin Feng taking in the son of Yuang Tianhai as his personal disciple, the grudges between both sides in the war between the two worlds, the opposition between Xianmen, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple, the grudges between the Yudu race and Taishu Temple, the secret origins of the Enchantress, and so on made everyone dizzy. Slowly Lin Feng said, "According to my calculations, the day of the Spirit Ocean reopening is not far away." When the others heard this, their gazes froze as they looked at Lin Feng. According to the rumors, the people who had the deepest understanding of the Spirit Ocean were Xianmen, Tianzong, Taishu Temple, and the Yuta race. As Lin Feng said this, he sighed in his heart. Although he had previously felt that the day of the Spirit Ocean reopening might be earlier than when he and the people of Taishu Temple had exited the Spirit Ocean, the degree of advance was much more than what he had expected. The reason was that he had a vague feeling in his heart, and there were some corresponding arrangements that needed to be made decisively. The secret key that was spread out from the hands of the Enchantress is real. Lin Feng first confirmed a guess that everyone had all along, then said, "There's an image of the great Tao returning to its origin in the Spirit Ocean. At the same time, once people enter it, they won't be able to leave in a short period of time." When Gu Jun and the rest heard this, they frowned slightly. They instantly thought of many things, but they didn't interrupt. Instead, they quietly listened to Lin Feng continue to speak. Lin Feng also didn't keep them in suspense and said unhurriedly, "If there are no accidents, I will bring my disciples into the Spirit Sea. The Great Void Monastery will also be the same. Similarly, Yudu clan, with Clan Master Yudu's 12 illusory sons as the leader, I believe the top practitioners will also enter." The fight for the Spirit Ocean was of great importance. No matter if it was Lin Feng, Taishu Temple, or the Yudu race, they would all fight with all their might. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if they could completely control the Spirit Ocean, even if they had to pay the price of Ocean Sanctuary, White Cloud Mountain, or Yudu Royal City, it would still be worth it. And the final ownership of the Spirit Ocean would undoubtedly affect the power structure of the entire heaven primordial world. Slowly, Ji Wenrui, he said, "However, can the Spirit Ocean, which is even stronger than Mysterious Sea, Ocean Sanctuary, and Netherworld Seas, be completely controlled by one person? We all know that even though the Void Temple turned the Spirit Sea into a heavenly realm in the past, They only grasped a stable passageway into the Spirit Sea. They are still 108,000 li away from controlling the Spirit Sea. Lin Feng smiled faintly. Times have changed. If we're talking about opportunities, this is the most suitable one. He looked around at everyone. However, even though the enchantress has spread the secret key to the Spirit Ocean, there is a limit to it, and only a small number of people will obtain it. To prevent others from coveting it, they will usually keep it a secret, so we don't know who among the strong practitioners of the demon race will have the chance to enter the Spirit Ocean like the enchantress. Let's not talk about the cultivators of our divine land. The situation over at Heaven Wasteland Vastland is confusing now, and it's hard to know what they are planning. Lin Feng didn't finish his sentence, but Gu Jun and the rest had undoubtedly understood what he meant. Their expressions instantly became solemn. If Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple were to head to the Spirit Ocean together, the human cultivation world of the Divine Land would immediately become extremely weak. Although it was a bit embarrassing, the people present would not deceive themselves at this time. The Xian Gate Sky Sect and the Void Temple were not here. In the face of a peak great demon, other than the ancient Imperial Dynasty and the Mount Shu Sword Sect, the other forces in the entire Divine Continent would find it difficult to contend against it. If Shi Xingyun was willing to help, the Great Qin Dynasty could be considered as the third force. Even though the Yudu race and the Enchantress would most likely head to the Spirit Ocean, and the Phoenix race wouldn't take the initiative to invade the Divine Land, there were still the Dragon race and the Primordial Devil Ape race in Heaven Wasteland Vastland. It was hard to predict whether they would obtain the secret key, enter the Spirit Ocean, or stay in the world. If these two forces attacked with full force, even the Ancient Dynasty, Mount Shu Sword Sect, and the Great Qin Dynasty would be under great pressure. Furthermore, the future Master Buddha had descended into the world and revived Buddhism, but traces of him had been hard to find. When Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple were no longer around, it was also unknown what they would do. The king of the underworld had gone into seclusion after being severely injured back then, so no one knew what his current situation was. Gu Jun looked at Lin Feng and nodded slightly. The last betrothal gift from Xianmin, Tianzong, the improved leaf fire divine art, and the things that had been foretold were indeed here. Chapter 1378. For the cultivators of Xianmin, Tianzong, if Lin Feng went to the spiritual sea with the top powerhouses in the sect, the other people in the sect would be safe with Hai as their backup. There would definitely be a huge difference between the others managing Hai and Lin Feng. If the outside world wanted to break through it, it would be impossible. With the return of the will of the Xiantian treasure tree, even if Lin Feng entered the spiritual sea, the Xiantian treasure tree and Yujing Mountain could still hide in the void and would not show themselves like last time. With such double insurance, Lin Feng could be said to be the person with the least worries. However, it was hard to say what would happen to the other human forces in the Divine Land. As long as 3 great demons of the Age of Enlightenment came to the Divine Land, the human cultivation world would be under great pressure. The most worrisome was the Lord of the Dragon Clan, Tenryu Jin, who was in the middle tribulation stage. After losing the deterrence of Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple, once he stepped out of Hai and set foot on the Divine Land, the human world would immediately be in a precarious situation. Lin Feng looked at the crowd and said slowly, "My sword attendant, Xuanli, will not enter the spiritual sea with me. She will stay in the Divine Land." However, the Divine Land is vast, and even she can only stay in one place to serve as a deterrent. However, if the demons fully invade, it is inevitable that she will lose sight of the others. Fellow Taoists, you should also prepare for a rainy day. When they heard that Lin Feng would leave the sky punishment sword in the Divine Land and not bring it into the spiritual sea, everyone's eyes lit up. After hearing Lin Feng's words, they also nodded slightly. The Xiamen Heavenly Sect had Mount Yujing and Hai as the foundation barrier to protect their own disciples. Although they could also try to beg the Xianmen heavenly sect to allow them to climb Mount Yujing or enter Yinghai to take refuge. In this way, the defense on the vast land of the Divine Land would be completely empty, and the whole world would inevitably suffer a great disaster. As for the spoils and fruits of victory from the war between the two worlds, it was equivalent to handing them over without any resistance. More importantly, the foundations of countless forces might be destroyed. The cultivators of Xianmen Tianzong could defend first and then retreat according to the situation. However, the other forces might not have enough time to react. If they wanted to retreat to Yujing Mountain or Yinghai to take refuge, they could only retreat as soon as possible. However, in this way, the territory that could still be defended by great demons of higher realms was now completely empty. Any demon clan that had attained the undying demon soul realm, or even the demon king realm, could cause great destruction and rampage as they pleased. Although it was said that as long as there was life, there was hope, but unless it was absolutely necessary, no force would give up their sect's foundation for nothing. After all, situations like Xianmen Tianzong's Yujing Mountain were far too rare. No matter which sect it was, the sect's foundation had been built up over a long period of time. Not only was the sect's defense strong, but the spiritual energy in the sect's veins had also been painstakingly improved by generations of predecessors, making it extremely suitable for the sect's disciples to cultivate. If the ancestral master of any sect wanted to establish a sect, he would definitely choose a place with abundant spiritual energy. If only the sect was destroyed, it might take a lot of time, energy, and resources, but it might be possible to rebuild it. However, if even the spiritual energy in the local veins was completely destroyed, there would be no possibility of rebuilding, and they would have to find another place. In this way, the force would be greatly weakened. Since the development of the human cultivation world in the Divine Land, most of the blessed lands with abundant spiritual energy were already occupied. Unless they had never been discovered, they were almost never left and used. If the sect of many forces was destroyed, it would be very difficult for each of them to find a suitable place to rebuild their sect. As for the resources, mines, spirit herbs, and spiritual fields that belong to each force, it would be fine if they could take them away. If they couldn't, they would naturally stay where they were and watch the big demons come to them. Generally speaking, be it the demons of planet Tianhuang or the human cultivators of the Divine Continent, unless there was a deep hatred between them, the main purpose of the war was to occupy resources and grotto heavens and treasures. Purely destructive attacks rarely happened. However, the situation now was special. It was hard to predict what the demons, who had just suffered a huge loss in the war between the two worlds, would do. Maybe they would also be worried that after the Battle of the Spirit Sea ended, Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple would return to the boundless world and launch a counterattack. However, no one could be sure what the outcome of the Battle of the Spirit Sea would be. The strongest Yudu race among the demons would definitely enter the Spirit Sea and fight with Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple. The situation in the Spirit Sea was complicated and special. Even if Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple wanted to work together to kick the demons out first and then decide the winner among the humans, it could only exist in their imagination. It was hard to put it into action. By then, both sides could only plan on their own. When they really met each other, it would probably be the most crucial moment to decide victory or defeat. At that time, there would naturally be no need to talk about who would give way. Everyone could only fight for it with all their might. It was also because of this special situation that the enchantress and the others had the chance to fish in troubled waters. As Lin Feng had said, if Xianli stayed in the Divine Land to guard it, she would naturally be able to deter the demons. However, the Divine Land was vast, and she might not be able to defend it perfectly. Even though Xianli could move on her own, if the demons really barged into the Divine Land, they would try their best to avoid her. Lin Feng said, "Fellow Taoists, there's no need to worry too much. Once Sai and Tai, one venerable from Taishu Temple, enter the Spirit Sea, we will definitely be cut off from the outside world. However, we don't know when we will be able to return. Even though the demons are wild, we will always be tense. As long as the situation in the Divine Land doesn't collapse instantly and can be delayed for some time, under the care of my sword attendant Xianli, there shouldn't be any big problems. Gu Jun, Shi Zongtong, and the rest looked at Lin Feng and slowly nodded their heads. In the end, heaven helps those who help themselves. Even if heaven punishment sword hung above the divine continent to deter the demons, if they really wanted to be safe and sound, they still had to rely on their own abilities. Reinforcements flew to the rescue, but those waiting to be rescued couldn't even slow down the enemy's footsteps. They were all dealt with directly, and everything was for naught. In a huge opportunity, there was naturally a huge danger, and the battle for the Spirit Sea was the same. The great Qin Emperor, Shi Zongtong, sat on his seat with his brows furrowed. He was deep in thought, as if he was having a hard time making a decision. His gaze looked towards Lin Feng, his gaze revealing a bit of struggle, but then became calm, his tightly furrowed brows gradually relaxing, his expression once again becoming calm and without ripples. Over the years, although Shi Xingyun would occasionally return to West Hill City to visit his mother and brother Shi Chongyun, he still maintained a distance from the Great Qin dynasty. The Great Qin dynasty urgently needed to strengthen itself. The path of karma of Buddhism and the successive changes of the leaf-fire divine technique of the ancient dynasty finally made Shi Zongtong make up his mind to give it a try. If the Five Emperors' True Dragon Secret technique could be successfully improved, not only would the cultivators of the Great Qin dynasty benefit, but the defensive formation of West Hill City and the chi of the dragon veins that the throne of the Great Qin dynasty could absorb would also be improved. If these changes were to be considered as a drop in the bucket in a short period of time, the improved Five Emperors' True Dragon Secret technique would also be of great help to Shi Xingyun. For Shi Xingyun, the speed at which he was improving had gradually slowed down. It was time for him to achieve a breakthrough and improve further. Shi Xingyun was close to Zhu Yi and Shi Tianhao in Xianmen Tianzhou. He also knew that Shi Xingyun and Zhu Yi had also discussed Tao. However, the Five Emperors' True Dragon Secret technique was a top-notch orthodoxy of the Great Qin dynasty. Unlike the Great Tempest Temple, which had long been destroyed, the Great Qin dynasty still existed. Furthermore, they had always been close to Xianmen Tianzhou. Therefore, Xianmen Tianzhou would not directly bypass them and touch the Five Emperors' True Dragon Secret technique. Shi Zongtong and the others did not feel the feedback from the Tao of heaven and earth. Similarly, although Shi Xingyun had almost left the Great Qin dynasty and was like a rogue cultivator when she discussed Tao with Zhu Yi, Shi Tianhao, and the others, it was only about the Tao of heaven and earth. She did not reveal the specific secrets of the Five Emperors' True Dragon Secret technique to Xianmen Tianzhou. However, just like in the ancient dynasty, if Xianmen Tianzhou really had the ability to help improve the primordial Tao of longevity technique, the final betrothal gift would undoubtedly be more important than all the previous gifts. If Xianmen Tianzhou really helped the Great Qin dynasty improve the Five Emperors' True Dragon Secret technique, it would be a great favor. However, Shi Zongtong had no choice but to seriously consider this matter. This was because no one could be sure if the dragon tribe had obtained the secret key to enter the spiritual sea. No one knew if the dragon tribe would go to the spiritual sea or stay in the colossal world when the spiritual sea was opened. The Great Qin dynasty even suspected that even if the dragon tribe had obtained the secret key to the spiritual sea, they would not enter the spiritual sea immediately. Instead, they would wait for Xianmen Tianzhou and the Taishu Temple to enter the spiritual sea. Then, they would rush to the Divine Land to deal with the Qin dynasty and Shi Xingyun at the risk of losing the opportunity to fight for the spiritual sea. This time, without Lin Feng and the Taishu Temple, Tenryu Jin, who was in the middle tribulation stage, would set foot in the Divine Land. Unless Xuanli stayed in West Hill City, the Great Qin dynasty would immediately face a disaster. In fact, the Qin dynasty had been seriously considering this issue for the past few years. This was also a way for them to show their goodwill when they tried to bring Shi Xingyun back to the Great Qin dynasty. And this time after seeing that ball of Nanmingli fire in Xiaoyan's hands before, and also finding out from Linfeng that the Spirit Sea isn't far from reopening, Shi Zongtong finally gradually made up his mind. Similar to Shi Zongtong, the other cultivators were also feeling complicated. Countless thoughts were running through their minds. Linfeng looked at the people around him and said calmly, "We are all from the same faction in the Divine Land. I do not wish to see any of us suffer a calamity. In 3 days' time, I will borrow the treasured land of the ancient emperor to give a lecture. If you're interested, you can send your disciples here. Take it as a token of my sincerity." When the people heard this, their bodies trembled slightly. They could tell that Linfeng was implying that any of them could seek help from Xianmen Tianzong to perfect their Tao. Chapter 1379. The commotion caused by the karma discussion back then had gradually subsided over time. However, today, because of the leaf fire god technique and the possible future primordial Tao of longevity, it had stirred up waves again. Under the superposition, it was even more intense. Although, because of their foundation and limited time, the vast majority of them would not be able to improve their Tao techniques when facing the great demon of the declining age. However, they were still extremely tempted. After all, it was a real increase in strength, and it would have a far-reaching impact on the foundation of 1,000 years. Everyone looked at Linfeng, who had a calm expression, and many thoughts floated in their minds. Is the master of the celestial sect really comparable to the world master? Compared to Shi Zongtong, who had regained his calm expression, the sect master of the Mount Shu Sword sect, Ji Wenrui, on the other side, although his expression did not change, he closed his eyes. No one could see the light that constantly flashed in his eyes. The state of mind of this great sword cultivator was undoubtedly a little turbulent. He, Sword Venerable Tiangang, and the others were not as stubborn as Sword Venerable Tsangming back then. Instead, they re-examined their own inheritance. These years, they had been constantly trying to push aside the clouds and discern the path in front of them. However, at this moment, Ji Wenrui felt that time waited for no man. Once the Divine Land was empty, they and the Great Qin dynasty would be in the most danger. The pressure that the Great Qin dynasty faced came from the dragon race, while the Mount Shu Sword sect had to worry about the primordial demon ape race. The earliest enmity between Mount Shu and the primordial demonic ape tribe stemmed from the fact that the sword ancestor, Ren Changmei, had killed the great sage Zhu Yin of that generation. As a result, the extreme Emperor Divine Abyss, who was the leader of the demonic ape tribe, had attacked Mount Shu. If it were not for the help of other experts of the human tribe, Mount Shu Sword sect would have been destroyed on the spot. Even so, they suffered heavy losses and suffered the greatest catastrophe in the history of the sect. After the death of Ji Huang Xinyuan, the primordial demon ape race gradually fell into a trough. In the long years that followed, the relationship between the Mount Shu Sword sect in the Divine Land and the primordial demon ape race had always been at odds. The Mount Shu Sword sect hoped to avenge the humiliation, but they had never been able to do so. Both sides had killed and injured each other, especially the Zhuyan demonic ape clan, which could be said to be old enemies with the Mount Shu Sword sect. Now that the current great sage Zhuyan had entered the Dharma-ending realm, and the current leader of the ape tribe, the great sage, was even more powerful. If the two demons set foot on the Divine Land at the same time and descended upon Mount Shu, the Big Dipper swordsman would not be able to hold the fort alone. Ji Wenrui's eyes were closed as if he was resting, but his heart was definitely not calm. He was constantly thinking. The reason why he was invited was because Xianmen Tianzong had briefly mentioned the matter of the spiritual ocean. For Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple, this was a great opportunity, but for Mount Shu Sword sect there was no doubt that there was a huge hidden danger. If the primordial demon ape tribe also obtained the secret key to the spiritual sea and focused their attention on the spiritual sea, the Shushan Sword sect would naturally not be afraid after the spiritual sea reopened. Even if Great Saint Jian still attacked, as long as the omnipotent sage did not arrive, the Mount Shu sword sect would still be able to hold on for a short time, even though it would be under great pressure to deal with it. If the great sage Juyin could not end the battle quickly with the sky-crushing sword in the Divine Land, then he would have to worry about whether he could return to Infinite Wasteland alive. But if the great sage did not have the secret key to the spiritual sea, then after Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple left, the Shushan sword sect would be under great pressure. Other forces were more or less facing risks, but not as obvious as the Great Qin dynasty and the Shushan sword sect. Of course, compared to Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple, the grievances between them and the demon tribe were nothing. Xianmin Tianzong had Yujing Mountain and Yinghai, which were easy to defend and hard to attack. Taishu Temple was a more obvious target and faced the same risks as the Shushan sword sect and the Great Qin dynasty, except that Taishu Temple was relatively stronger. Sword Venerable Tong Tian said, "Sect Master Lin, can we find a way to ambush and kill the great demons who dare to invade the Divine Land after the spiritual sea opens? As you said before, it is hard to communicate between the spiritual sea and the spiritual sea. The demon tribe cannot be sure if the cultivators of your sect and Taishu Temple have entered the spiritual sea." He did not say something, but everyone present had the same thought. Among the top powers of the human race and the demon race, among those who could clearly enter the spirit sea, the human race occupied Xiangate Heavenly Sect and Great Void Temple, while the demon race only had Yudu race. If Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple could form an alliance, one of them would enter the spiritual sea first and not let Yudu race take the initiative, while the other would return and hide in the Divine Land to ambush the great demons. In that case, the situation would no doubt be very advantageous to the human cultivation world. But the problem is, not to mention the relationship between the Xiangate Sky Sect and the Void Temple, the atmosphere is tense, even if the two sides are allies. When it comes to the ownership of the Spirit Sea, who would be willing to work for the other? Those who entered the spiritual sea first might not be the first. Refining the spiritual sea wasn't something that could be done in one go, and even if they entered the spiritual sea first, they would have to face the competition of Yudu race. However, those who entered the spiritual sea first would undoubtedly have a huge advantage. In the current situation in the Divine Land, Xianmin Tianzong was undoubtedly in an advantageous position. If Taishu Temple obtained the spiritual sea, the situation would probably change immediately. However, in the depths of everyone's heart, Taishu Temple obtaining the spiritual sea was no doubt a nightmare. But Xianmin Tianzong obtaining the spiritual sea might not be a good thing either. This had nothing to do with their relationship with Xianmin Tianzong, and it had nothing to do with their feelings. It was purely the self-awareness of being in charge of an area, other than beyond Heaven Mountain, which was completely dependent on Xianmin Tianzong and was like a branch. As long as the other powers had their own thoughts, they wouldn't be willing to have an eternal mountain appear above their heads. As long as they had the power to interfere and stop it, they would spare no effort to do so. This logic was also applicable to Taishu Temple. However, the conditions to enter the spiritual sea were very harsh, and people didn't have the energy to spare. When they couldn't think of anything else, they completely gave up on the idea. Gu Jun looked at Heavenly Sword Venerable and said with a solemn expression, "We also can't be sure which strong practitioners of the demon race have entered the spiritual sea. If other than the Yudu race and the Enchantress, the strong practitioners of the dragon race and the primordial devil ape race have also entered the spiritual sea at the first instant. While only one of us humans has entered, wouldn't the pressure on the spiritual sea be too great? Boundless World is only setting up an ambush and not taking the initiative to attack. If the other party doesn't come, it'll be a waste of time. If we're talking about taking the initiative to attack, then we're back to the previous problem. We can't be sure which of the demon races are weak." Sword Venerable of the Thunderous said, "Even if we take the initiative to attack, it'll be effective. Unless we take down the dragon race's Xianhai, If the spiritual sea is lost and falls into the hands of the demon race, it'll affect the overall situation extremely badly. Heavenly Sword Venerable of the Thunderous nodded. You're right. The atmosphere suddenly became weird, and there was a strange silence. Lin Feng sat on a chair and tapped his fingers on the armrest. Looking at this scene, his lips curled into an unnoticeable smile. Even though no one said it out loud, but Lin Feng also roughly knew what was going on with the strange situation in front of him. To the other powers of the divine continent, in the current situation, excluding the problem of the conflict between the human race and the demon race, looking at the entire heaven primordial world as a whole, the Yudu race obtaining the spirit sea wasn't necessarily an unacceptable result. In some sense, it was even better than the Great Void Temple or the Xianmen Heaven Sect obtaining the spirit sea. If the Yudu race obtained the spiritual sea, the first to bear the pressure would be the demons of Heaven Wasteland. This meant that a new generation of demon saint emperors would be born. Then, even if the Yudu race's spearhead was pointed at the Divine Land, they would still look for Xianmen, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple. In the long run, there was no doubt that there would be endless trouble. If Mirage Sun and Yudu's abilities continued to grow, or if some great Yudu demon rose up and reappeared the power of Heavenly Sea and Yudu in the past, it would only be a matter of time before he, who had the power of the spiritual sea, swept through Heaven Wasteland. If there had to be an uncertain factor, it would be Xianmen Tianzong, who had occupied the Divine Land, but his abilities were still rising. It was hard to predict his limits. Under such a dangerous situation, Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple would finally work together. Heaven Punishment Sword and Hao Ian Mirror would also work together. The difference in abilities between the two sides and the odds of victory would become confusing. The overall situation of Heaven Wasteland would also sink into a chaotic yet balanced state. Such a state was undoubtedly more suitable for the survival and rise of other powers. However, this kind of thinking could only be thought in the bottom of their hearts. No one would say it out in the open. Besides, most of the people on the scene couldn't participate in the battle of the Spirit Sea. Even if they had any thoughts or expectations in their hearts, they were just personal thoughts. To them, the most pressing problem in front of their eyes was naturally the danger they might face in the battle of the Spirit Sea. Therefore, 3 days later, Lin Feng in Eternal Life City opened an altar to give a lecture. Many powers sent their most outstanding disciples to listen to the lecture. Lin Feng's lecture on the altar was simple and profound. He didn't touch on the specific techniques, but expounded on the great Tao of heaven and earth. These things were also firmly remembered by the people listening to the lecture. Even if they couldn't completely understand many things, they would bring them back to their elders. These principles from a strategically advantageous position made the top strong practitioners feel that they had gained a lot. This trip wasn't in vain. Even if there were no follow-up events, they had still benefited a lot. Of course, the thing that could directly benefit them was the private consultation after the lecture. This was private consultation. As for what the consultation was about, only the people involved knew. However, the bystanders could roughly guess, because everyone came for this. In the days that followed, as time went by, there would be some cultivators who felt the great Tao of heaven and earth faintly vibrating when they were practicing their Tao. According to the difference in the depth of the Tao, the time would vary. Then, there would be news from Kunlun Mountain asking people to go to Yujing Mountain to receive the lecture. The human cultivation world in the Divine Land seemed to be gradually ushering in a brand new situation. Chapter 1380. The Dharma Assembly and Elixir Assembly were still in full swing. However, the top bigwigs of the various factions were all focused on Lin Feng's speech later on. Lin Feng was giving a lecture in Longevity City. As the host, the ancient dynasty would naturally be present. The current ancient Emperor Gujun was personally accompanying him on the side. There were also other experts from the ancient emperor's bloodline who were listening as well. After listening for a while, Gu Yuankai muttered to himself. After a while, he said, It seems to be an extremely simple principle, and there doesn't seem to be anything special about it. However, if you think about it carefully, you can vaguely sense a deeper meaning. It seems that every time you think about it, you will gain something completely different. Naturally, he used his magic power to transmit his voice. His voice could only be heard by the cultivators of the ancient dynasty. When the cultivators of the ancient dynasty with lower cultivation heard this, they all thought carefully, and their eyes gradually revealed a look of understanding. Guqing looked at Gu Yuankai and said, "The truth can be seen in plain sight. The more it is like this, the more profound his cultivation is." In the past, the other party was more inclined to cooperate with Taishu Temple and had reservations about Xianmen Tianzong. The reason was not because of hostility, but because it was difficult to grasp Xianmen Tianzong's potential. However, at this moment, the group of ancient clan cultivators led by Gu Yuankai had long changed their stance. Xianmen Tianzong had already successfully displayed strength that surpassed that of Taishu Temple. Furthermore, he was far from reaching the peak and was still constantly climbing. If there were no major changes, then as time passed, the gap between Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple would only grow, and Xianmen Tianzong's advantage would become more and more obvious. From the ancient dynasty's perspective, they naturally did not wish to see the emergence of such a colossal figure. However, as their overall policy changed, they could now calmly face the changes and development of Xianmen Tianzong. As Xianmen Tianzong's strength continued to grow, the new number one holy land of the divine land became more and more aloof. It did not interfere with the development of the ancient dynasty and other forces in the divine land. Hearing Gu Cheng's words, Gu Yuankai nodded. Truth can be seen in plain sight. The profound gate's sect master has long since reached the level of returning to the natural state and seeing the great Tao. It is to be expected that he would have such knowledge. Gu Cheng sighed softly. The other betrothal gifts are fine, but this last gift is really heavy. Gu Yuankai and the others did not speak, but they all had expressions of approval on their faces. Putting aside how important the improvement of the primordial way of longevity manual was to the ancient dynasty, it was not entirely true that the ancient dynasty's gains were not unique and superior to the other sects that had improved as well. This time, Lin Feng chose Longevity City as the venue for his lecture, and not his own Kunlun mountain range's Yujing Mountain. He also chose the time of Xiao Yin and Xiao Zhen'er's engagement, and not any other time. Not only tangible and tangible things could be considered gifts. Gu Jun said indifferently, "The profound gate's sect master has a grand bearing, and he has always cared for his disciples. Although it is unexpected for him to be so generous, it is also reasonable. He and Xiao Yin will not ask for anything in return, but courtesy demands reciprocity. Our dynasty naturally cannot do nothing." Gu Cheng and Gu Yuankai looked at Gu Jun looked at Lin Feng on the altar and slowly said, "In this time's battle for the Spirit Sea, there may be undercurrents surging in the vast land of the divine continent." The strong practitioners of the ancient dynasty nodded slightly when they heard this. To most people in the heaven primordial world, no matter if it was the demon race or the human race, they did not want the Spirit Sea to fall into the hands of Xianmen Tianzong, Taishu Temple, or the Yudu race. The few that obtained the Spirit Sea secret naturally hoped that their family could have the luck to obtain the Spirit Sea. That would be the best result. If it really didn't work, then they would settle for the next best thing. No one would get it, and it would be better to maintain the status quo. If it was obtained by any power other than Xianmen Tianzong, Taishu Temple, and the Yudu race, it was barely acceptable. However, if it was obtained by one of the three, it would be the worst result. To Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple, the bigger worry was that other than the Yudu race, they were uncertain about the movements of the other strong races of the demon world. They might encounter greater pressure in the Spirit Sea than expected, and they might also face the possibility of serious fire in the backyard of the divine land. As for the elusive future star glazed Buddha Master and the king of the underworld, it was hard to predict what they would do in this battle of the Spirit Sea. With a lack of information from all sides, it was easy for unexpected things to happen. Even if Lin Feng was proficient in the path of karma deduction, the clues in front of him were blurry and not clear enough. Slowly, Gu Jun said, "This time, to the divine land, it might not be inferior to the previous war between the two worlds. We will be careful." The ancient dynasty didn't obtain the Spirit Sea secret key that was scattered by the enchantress. It was obvious that they were going to stay in the divine land this time. Unlike the previous war between the two worlds, the ancient dynasty only joined in the middle of the war. This time, the ancient dynasty was the first to bear the brunt of the conflict. Although it was a long time ago, when the ancient emperors were at the peak of their power, they also had many bloody battles with the demon race. Unlike the Mount Shu Sword sect, which mainly had a grudge with the Julian Devil Ape race, the ancient emperor didn't have a good relationship with the heavenly Devil Ape race. The current master of the ape race was the Great Sage. At the same time, there was also a feud between the ancient emperor and the dragon race. Although it wasn't as serious as the feud between the Qin dynasty and Shi Xingyun, it was still tense. The ancient dynasty was located in the southern border. One of the realm passageways that led to the divine land in the vast Tianhuang mainland was also here. However, this conflict might be an opportunity for the ancient dynasty. Although the ancient dynasty had participated in the war and spared no effort, they didn't make much progress because they joined the war late. As a result, it was of limited use in raising their prestige. The Battle of the Spirit Sea this time was one of the few top forces in the Divine Land after the Taishu Temple and Xianmen Tianzong went to the Spirit Sea. For the ancient dynasty, danger coexisted with opportunity. With proper planning, it might be a good opportunity to improve themselves. Now, we're waiting for good news from Xianmen Tianzong. However, we can't have thoughts of relying on them and slacking off. That will only bring harm to our cultivation. Everyone understands this, so I won't say more. Gu Jun said, "The primordial Tao of longevity mantra is the foundation of our dynasty. Its improvement will affect all aspects. Everyone, be prepared. If the demons don't have the upper hand in the upcoming battle of the Spirit Sea, the situation in the Divine Land will change drastically. Our dynasty must also be prepared." His gaze was distant and full of vicissitudes. If it's as I expected, the master of the Mystic Gate has great ambitions. Now that he has shown hope of success, our dynasty will continue to follow him. Gu Cheng, Gu Yuankai, and the other big shots of the ancient dynasty bowed to Gu Jun. "Yes, your majesty." The Dharma Assembly and Elixir Convocation in Longevity City were carried out in a stable and orderly manner. The top big shot's attention was focused on Lin Feng, the master of the Mystic Gate, while the cultivators with lower cultivation levels were still paying attention to the Dharma Assembly and Elixir Convocation. The process of the Dharma Assembly was turbulent and fierce, but the result was calm. The most outstanding one was still the successor of Xianmen Tianzong. Now, it was publicly acknowledged in the Divine Land that the higher one's cultivation level was, the greater the gap between the Xianmen Tianzong cultivators and the successors of other forces, and the more obvious the advantage they had. Looking at those true disciples of the Mystic Gate who were already eye-catching during the Golden Elixir period and even at the Foundation establishment stage, everyone felt that there was no hope of catching up. When the gap was large enough, emotions like jealousy and hatred would gradually become difficult to sustain. Instead, they would slowly turn into yearning and admiration. Now, the excellence of the Xianmen Tianzong cultivators could no longer change the emotions of the crowd. If something big happened to the successor of Xianmen Tianzong, then it would attract the attention of others. The dark horse in the Dharma Assembly that truly exceeded everyone's expectations came from the Mount Shu Sword sect. The Mount Shu Sword sect, which had been sealed off for many years, actually had a junior disciple brought by Ji1 Rue to participate in this Dharma Assembly. Among them, the performance of Mount Shu's rising star made everyone gasp in surprise. At this time, people seemed to remember that even if the Mystic Gate's swordsmanship had surpassed it, The Mount Shu sword sect was still the top holy land of swordsmanship in the world. However, in these years, because Mount Shu had sealed off its mountain, its reputation was weak, and its activities in the outside world were reduced, causing many of the younger generation who yearned for swordsmanship to turn and enter other sections. The light dance pavilion branch of Xianmen Tianzong was naturally the first choice. Those who couldn't enter Xianmen Tianzong were also absorbed by the Heavenly Sword Sect, the Thunderbolt Sword Sect, the Celeritas Sword Sect, and other sword sections. In everyone's understanding, the Mount Shu Sword Sect, which also had the support of its own medium-class world population, might not be in a situation where there was a complete shortage of talents, but the material selection was severely reduced. This would undoubtedly greatly slow down the speed at which the Mount Shu sword sect recovered. The resources of the younger generation of disciples were exhausted, and they needed a long time to recuperate. But obviously, under the influence of Sword Lord Celestial Dipper, Ji Wenrui, and Sword Lord Li Meng, this former #1 holy land of swordsmanship was constantly recovering its own vitality. The sharpness seemed to be restrained, like a sharp sword returning to its scabbard. But the blade that was nurtured in the scabbard was still sharp, and, at the same time, there was a bit more vitality that hadn't been seen for many years. Other than the successor of Xianmen Tianzong, among the young disciples who participated in the spell gathering, the successor of the Mount Shu sword sect had the most eye-catching performance. Only the young cultivators of the ancient dynasty, who were the host, could compare with them. The limelight of the younger generation disciples of the Great Zhou dynasty, the Great Qin dynasty, the Heavenly Sword sect, the Northern Militant Imperial Court, and other forces were all overshadowed. Compared to the spell gathering, where everyone showed off their skills, the pill gathering obviously had more harvests. More or less, all the participants had their own gains. Later on, resources other than pills were also circulating in large amounts. Lin Feng had opened the altar to speak for many days. With the official end of the spell gathering and the pill gathering, he also put away the altar and led his disciples to bid farewell to Gu Jun and the others. After bidding farewell to the other fellow Taoists who had come to watch the ceremony, they returned to Mount Yujing in the Kunlun mountain range. Returning to Mount Yujing, he sent a group of younger disciples back to their respective caves. Lin Feng came to the 3rd floor of the Tower of Scriptures and sat on the ground. Looking at the group of disciples in front of him, he smiled and said, "The Tao of heaven and earth is too wonderful for words. You should carefully study it. The day of the reopening of the spiritual sea is gradually approaching. Our sect should also try our best to be comprehensive." Lin Feng said to Zhu Yi, "Xiaoyi, you will take the lead in perfecting and sublimating the Tao of other forces." Then, Lin Feng looked at the 4 of them, Yu Hongyan, Yang Qing, Li Yuanfang, and Luo Qinwu. Follow your second senior brother. Take what you are interested in and study it carefully. Verify it with our sect's Yin and Yang true scripture and what you have learned and comprehended in the past. Walk your own path. Yes, master. Zhu Yi and the others nodded in agreement. Chapter 1381. After giving instructions to Zhu Yi and the others, Lin Feng turned to Xiao Yin, Wang Lin, and Shi Tianhao. "Little Yin, you should stay in the Nether Sea and refine Heaven's Bane and the Nether Sea. There's no need to rush. Just let nature take its course." Lin Feng first said to Xiao Yin, "You don't have to participate in this trip to the Nether Sea. Refining the Nether Sea with all your might is the right thing for you." Xiao Yin smiled. "Master, I'm really sorry that I can't participate in such a big event." Although he said that, his eyes were calm, without the slightest fluctuation. Clearly, he understood Lin Feng's good intentions. Beside him, Shi Tianhao joked, "Eldest senior brother, you're staying to look after the house this time." Xiao Yin waved his fist at Shi Tianhao. Lin Feng and the others couldn't help but laugh. "All these years, you've always felt that someone was obstructing you when refining the Nether Sea. One of them is naturally the Grand Elder of Taishu Temple, Wu Mengqi." Lin Feng said, "As for the other, In order to appease us in Taishu Temple, the Nether Sea voluntarily gave up its influence on Heaven's Bane and the Nether Sea. Thus, it obtained the chance to secretly seize the Hao Yin mirror. His disciple, Taoist Yuming, could also use the power of the Nether Sea. However, he lost this ability during the war between the two worlds. So, it can be concluded that Taoist Yuming was plotted against by his disciple, Shintazhe. The other person who is obstructing you from refining the Nether Sea is most likely Shintazhe. Dots of light faintly flickered within Lin Feng's eyes. This time when the Spirit Sea reopens, no matter if it's the Void Temple's Wu Mengqi or that Shintazhe, they'll both make a move in the Nether Sea. If you follow me into the Spirit Sea, they will seize the opportunity to seize control of the Netherworld Sea as much as possible and erase the marks you have left over the years. If you don't enter the Spirit Sea, they will continue to drag you down. In short, it will not be peaceful. At this moment, the eyes of Zhu Yi and Wang Lin were also glowing. Lin Feng continued, "What we need to be vigilant about is that the king of the underworld is an astute person. It is very likely that he will make use of this opportunity to interfere. Although he has tried his best to conceal it, I can still vaguely see that there are clues connecting him and Taoist Yuming, as well as Taoist Yuming and Shintazhe. If I'm not mistaken, the king of the underworld has been lying low all this time. Although that sword attack from back then caused him great damage, he hasn't wasted all these years. The battle for the spiritual sea is his chance, and he won't miss it. Even if he doesn't have the key, he'll still make use of it." After listening attentively to Lin Feng, Xiao Yin nodded solemnly. "Rest assured, Master. Your disciple understands the gravity of the situation." Although Xianli would not follow Lin Feng to the spiritual sea and would stay in the vast thousand domains, as the disciple of sect leader Lin Feng, he was responsible for guarding the divine prefecture. He could not afford to be careless. Although he had Heaven's Bane and the Netherworld Sea to rely on, firstly, he had not fully grasped them. Secondly, Heaven's Bane was hostile to the heaven-punishing sword. If Xianli stepped into the Netherworld Sea and the spiritual sea, the result would be the same. Once the Netherworld Sea changed, Xiao Yin could only rely on himself. His greatest reliance might become a shackle instead. Then, Lin Feng turned to look at Shi Tianhao and said slowly, "Tianhao, you don't have to rush into the spiritual sea when it reopens. I'll leave a key for you, but you have to wait in the divine land for a while." Shi Tianhao, who was teasing Xiao Yin just now, was stunned. Xiao Yin burst out laughing. "Rascal, stay and watch the house with me." Shi Tianhao also waved his fist at Xiao Yin. Then, his expression turned solemn as he looked at Lin Feng. "Master, have you discovered my grandfather's whereabouts?" All these years, Shi Tianhao had stayed in the battlefield of the void to search for Shi Zhongtian, but to no avail. Lin Feng answered, "That's right. Although the clues are vague, I can feel that the time for you and your grandfather to reunite is coming soon. However, great fortune also hides great misfortune. So, on the day the spiritual sea reopens, you should stay in the divine land first. After you find your grandfather, we'll decide what to do." Shi Tianhao immediately nodded and said, "Yes, Master. For now, don't continue to enter the battlefield of the void, lest you miss the opportunity to meet your grandfather." Lin Feng said, "These years you've been outside and rarely come back. In the following days, you should cultivate with me, boy creation. It will be very beneficial for your cultivation." Behind him, a figure appeared. He was dressed in a black and white Taoist robe. His eyes contained the characteristics of an infant, a teenager, and a middle-aged man. It was like a combination of life and time. It was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s. His facial features were handsome and charming. Shi Tianhao and the others recognized him. This middle-aged man was the manifestation of the primordial spirit of their master's Dharma treasure, the Bell of Creation. Lin Feng said, "Tianhao, your Dharma, whether it's Ing Yuan or the Desolate God, both evolve the chaos, the changes of the primitive world, and the cycle of the beginning. You can cultivate together with creation. Shi Tianhao nodded and answered, I understand. The middle-aged man smiled and bowed to Shi Tianhao. Please advise me, brother. Shi Tianhao and the others had become familiar with him over the years. They also smiled and bowed. Please advise me, brother. Creation will enter the spiritual sea with me. Before that, how much each of you can gain depends on yourselves, Lin Feng said with a smile and waved his hand. Go quickly. After instructing Shi Tianhao, Lin Feng looked at Wang Lin. Little Lin, how's your recent attempt? Wang Lin revealed a faint smile and answered, I've made some initial progress, but I still need to continue to figure it out. In his eyes, flowing lights flashed. It wasn't dazzling, but it was breathtaking and eye-catching. Wang Lin's aura gradually changed. His body actually emitted a powerful force of blood and flesh. Although it wasn't as overbearing as Shi Tianhao's desolate god's body, it was still extremely shocking. Like Xiaoyan, Zhu Yi, and the others, he sat on the ground opposite Lin Feng. His figure didn't seem to have changed, and his aura was also limited to the third floor of the scripture depository, so it wouldn't affect the outside world. However, Lin Feng and the others who were in the same room could all feel the terrifying force of his body, which seemed to tear the void with a single breath. Compared to Shi Tianhao's desolate god's body, which was majestic and wild like a giant beast and violent and bloody force, the aura emitted from Wang Lin's body at this moment was extremely vicious, cold, and bloodthirsty. However, what made people feel strange was that Wang Lin's left and right hands and right leg were still normal, and there was no shocking force emitted from them. The terrifying blood and flesh emerged from Wang Lin's head, torso, and left leg, giving people a strange feeling, as if his hands and right leg were prosthetics. Seeing this, Lin Feng revealed a smile on his face and nodded. Not bad, very good. According to your current progress, you can still improve on the day when the spiritual sea reopens. Wang Lin replied, I dare not slack off, and I will cultivate hard. Lin Feng then looked at Yu Hongyan, Yang Qing, Li Yuanfang, and Luo Qingwu, and finally his eyes fell on Li Yuanfang, saying, this time, when the spiritual sea reopens, my clone will go to the spiritual sea together. So Yuanfang, you will also stay behind a guarding high, in case there are thieves taking advantage of the situation to invade. If the situation changes greatly, and we need to evacuate our disciples or disciples of other sects to Yinghai to temporarily hide, you will also be responsible for controlling it. Li Yuanfang nodded his head solemnly. I understand. One must not have the intention to harm others, but one must always be on guard against others. If other forces ask for help to enter Yinghai to take refuge, Xianmen Tianzong would not reject them. However, if someone had ulterior motives and took the opportunity to create trouble, then Li Yuanfang might have to make a prompt decision. He was a righteous person who sought to plan everything properly and followed the prescribed order, but he was definitely not an indecisive person. On the contrary, he handled things swiftly and never showed mercy when it was time to be harsh. Next, Lin Feng looked towards Yang Qing, faintly smiling. Little Qing, back then when the Battle of Mount Shu ended, I once said at that time, after 100 years, you might be able to wait for a chance and have the hope of seeing your lover again. Yang Qing's breathing paused slightly, and her state of mind that had been calm for many years finally shook again. She raised her head to look at her master, but did not say anything, as if she was afraid of waking up from a dream. Lin Feng smiled and nodded. At that time, the chance that I mentioned was the day when the spiritual sea reopened. The spiritual sea is the sea of spiritual qi and the sea of Tao. Thousands of Tao in the world converge and manifest, continuously giving birth and creation. At present, that is the most likely place for your lover to be resurrected. In the past, I deduced that after the Battle of Mount Shu ended, after about 100 years, the spiritual sea will open. However, other changes happened after that, causing the day of the spiritual sea opening to be brought forward. Lin Feng smiled indifferently. However, this is undoubtedly a good thing for you. Yangqing took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Spiritual sea." Ting ting. He came back to his senses and bowed to Lin Feng. Although he did not say anything, everything was already understood. Lin Feng continued, "You also have to be calm. It is not easy to control the spiritual sea, and it is still unknown whether you can reunite or not." Yangqing stood up and said softly, "Master, I understand. It is only a glimmer of hope, and I am already extremely satisfied." Lin Feng nodded slightly. "In the following time, cultivate seriously. At that time, you and Hong Yin will follow your second senior brother and third senior brother to go to the spiritual sea with me." Yu Hongyin and Yang Qing both nodded calmly. "Yes, master." Lin Feng looked at Luo Qingwu. "Qingwu, you stay with Yuan Fong. Yuan Fong will guarding high, and you will stay in the divine land." Luo Qingwu replied, "Yes, master, I understand." Lin Feng said, "In addition to dealing with the various changes that may happen in the divine land, I have one more thing for you to secretly pay attention to." Chapter 1382. Hearing Lin Feng's special reminder, Luo Qingwu couldn't help but look curious. "What is it? Please tell me, master." Lin Feng's gaze then turned to Yang Qing. "It's about your fifth senior brother's disciple, Zhou Yunsong." Upon hearing this, Yang Qing, Luo Qingwu, and the others were slightly stunned at first, and then revealed thoughtful expressions. Although everyone, including Yang Qing, was a little surprised, they all knew that their master would not speak without thinking. Zhu Yi and Wang Lin's eyes revealed some understanding. They looked at each other, and Zhu Yi slowly said, "We have to start from the matter of Golden Cicada kidnapping people back then, but it has nothing to do with Golden Cicada." Wang Lin nodded. "It's about the matter behind it, which originated from Cloud Song himself." Hearing this, the others also reacted. Xiao Yin sat cross-legged, hands on his knees, and said with a frown, "Although the whereabouts of the future star Glazed Buddha Lord and Golden Cicada are uncertain, the matter back then has already been settled for them. Even if they capture Cloud Song again, it will be difficult to gain anything, not to mention that the future Buddha himself has already been born. But if Taishu Temple also wants to enter the spiritual sea, how many people can they spare to make things difficult for our sect?" The Tao-changing talismans in Zhu Yi's eyes kept flashing, while Wang Lin's eyes seemed to have become two mirrors, reflecting a mysterious and strange light. "Although I can't see it clearly, I feel that it's not necessarily a forcible kidnapping, but some other plan," Zhu Yi said in a low voice. Wang Lin's gaze turned slightly cold. The supreme yin-yang mirror was, after all, a treasure of Taishu Temple in the past. Even if they don't have any special means, they should have some information that we don't know. Li Yuanfang asked calmly, "Master, did Mr. Miao say anything about the supreme yin-yang mirror?" Lin Feng shook his head and said, "Sure Hao had left Taishu Temple long before Chan Xingyu entered the temple, so his knowledge of this matter was limited. Before this matter was quite secretive, and it was almost passed down from the Abbey Dean's lineage. Even the Taishang elders did not know much about it." Xiao Yin said with some regret, "In the memory of Taoist Master Red Sun, although he knows that the Taishu Taoist brought the supreme yin-yang mirror into the Dead Sea, he entered the underworld sea because of the battle with Jihuang Xinyuan before the supreme yin-yang mirror broke and returned to the universe. Therefore, his knowledge of this matter is limited." Lin Feng said with a smile, "Although the clues at hand are still a little lacking, I have a general idea in my heart. Qingwu, you just have to handle it carefully." When everyone heard this, their spirits were lifted. Luo Qingwu nodded. "Please instruct me, master." At the same time, in White Cloud Mountain, there was another tense scene. At the top of White Cloud Mountain, all the higher-ups of Taishu Temple were present, either in projection or in person. The day of the reopening of the spiritual sea is much earlier than expected. For our temple, there are advantages and disadvantages. The current Abbey Dean of Taishu Temple, Lin Daohan, said in a flat tone. In front of him, Xianlin Taoist, Yin Yuanjin, and the others nodded without saying a word. Although no one said it explicitly, even they had to admit that as time passed, the momentum of Xianmen Tianzong's rise was becoming more and more terrifying. What was more terrifying was that this seemed to be endless. It was just the beginning, and he was far from reaching his peak. As time passed, the growth of Xianmen Tianzong's strength became more and more unimaginable. From this point of view, the early reopening of the spiritual sea might not be a bad thing. However, it was much earlier than expected, and the Haoyan mirror still couldn't recover to its peak. To Taishu Temple, this was naturally a disadvantage. After all, Xianmen Tianzong wasn't the only opponent they had to face in the battle of the spiritual sea. Heaven-punishing sword couldn't enter the spiritual sea, but the Yudu clan would definitely send in a large number of strong practitioners with clan master Huan Ri Yudu as their leader. Other than that, it was hard to predict what kind of strong practitioners would interfere with the distribution of the secret key of the spiritual sea from the enchantress, so they had to be on guard. The Grand Elder of Taishu Temple, Kuang Heng, said silently, "Now that things have come to this, there's no need to say more. We'll just do our best." Lin Daoan nodded. "That's right. That's the logic." Dao Venerable Xian Wen said, "In the war between the two worlds, the Nine Heavens Imperial Court was broken. Even though we've tried our best to repair it, the damaged vital chi is still hard to recover. After the spiritual sea reopens, if the demon race steps into the divine land, they might covet our temple. The Haoyan mirror will still have to leave the divine land and enter the spiritual sea. White Cloud Mountain will become extremely empty." Shoichi Dashin said, "This time, I'll stay in the divine land." Lin Daohan said, "No, the three of you, along with your disciples, will enter the spiritual sea." Dazzling brilliance shone in everyone's eyes as they looked at Lin Daohan. Lin Daohan's expression and tone didn't change at all. The master of Xianmen has accepted the son of Yudu in the heavenly ocean as his disciple. His thoughts can already be seen clearly. His thoughts can't be said to be wrong, but we can't say that it's impossible either. However, the risk of failure is also huge, so huge that not only Xianmen Tianzong, but the entire divine land can't bear it. Since our paths are different, we can't work together. We'll definitely have to fight it out with him. And if the spiritual sea falls into the hands of the Yudu race or the demon race, the result will be even more unimaginable. Lin Daohan said calmly, "No matter if it's for the sake of bringing order to the divine land or to fight against the demon race, the battle of the spiritual sea is of utmost importance to our temple. We can't afford any mistakes. After we refine the spiritual sea, even if the demons cause havoc on the land, we can still settle accounts with them." Kai Fengzhou frowned slightly. "Isn't it too risky? If unpredictable changes happen in the divine land, it'll be hard for our temple to deal with them." Lin Daohan replied softly, "It's either the Haoyan mirror or the heaven punishment sword. Other than these two, the king of the underworld most likely won't make a move. However, if the Haoyan mirror enters the spiritual sea, he won't be able to do anything about the heaven punishment sword. Therefore, if the king of the underworld stays in the boundless world, he'll at most have a backup plan at the netherworld sea. The person who should be wary of him is Xianmen Tianzong. In the future, if the star-glazed Buddha doesn't enter the spiritual sea, he might come to our temple to cut his karma. In that case, we'll return his karma." Due to Golden Cicada's mistake, his golden alms bowl ended up in the hands of the master of the Celestial Gate. It's also fate. Lin Daohan paused. "Speaking of this, it's related to another key point. If I go to the spiritual sea with the three elders, it'll be convenient for us to carry out our plan in the divine land. The master of the Celestial Gate, Master Yi, and the High Venerable of the Extreme Tao are all proficient in the way of deducing karma and fate. They might have noticed something, but they probably haven't figured out yet. The less we get involved, the less clues they can deduce. It'll be easier for us to carry out our plan." Dao Venerable Yun sighed. "If you didn't mention it to Uncle Master Tai, we wouldn't have expected things to turn out this way." Lin Daohan continued. "Tianqing Daoist is a variable. But if he returns to the White Cloud Mountain, Our temple has prepared a special method for him. At least, we can make him return empty-handed." Everyone present nodded slightly. Although Tianqing Daoist was a grand elder of the Taishu realm in the Dharma ending realm, he came from the Taishu temple after all. If they were prepared, they wouldn't have to worry about him causing trouble. As for the Nether Sea, we can only ask Uncle Master Wu to act according to the situation. Lin Daohan looked at Wu Mingqi. In Wu Mingqi's eyes, thousands of images of disasters and tribulations in the Nether Sea flashed. He nodded silently and didn't say anything. Lin Daohan said, "I have to admit that if the celestial crushing sword of the master of the celestial sex stays in the divine land, the demon clan will become a variable and cause the least harm. At the moment, it's a blessing for the entire divine land, and even we will benefit from it. But at the same time, if the master of the celestial sect enters the spiritual sea, no one will be able to control that evil sword. Once the sword goes out of control, the demon clan and the king of the underworld won't have to do anything evil. The people in the divine land will be plunged into misery and suffering. This is something I can't control the most, but I can only sigh." Lin Daohan's tone had always been flat and emotionless. It was only at this moment that there was a slight fluctuation in his tone. Because the celestial crushing sword couldn't enter the spiritual sea, Xianmin Tianzong's power to fight for the spiritual sea was greatly reduced. But in this way, there was also a hidden danger, which made Lin Daohan feel conflicted. If the celestial crushing sword really went out of control, it would be useless even if Shoichi Daishin stayed. Even if Tai One's supremacy stayed, without the Haoyan mirror, there was nothing he could do. On the other side, the fight for the spiritual sea did not allow the Taishu temple to hold back. Man proposes, God disposes. Refining the spiritual sea and combining it with the Haoyan mirror, we can suppress this sword. Tai One's supremacy, who had been silent all this time, said at this moment, "How can there be anything in this world that is completely satisfactory and without any risks?" He closed his eyes, but looked around. Everyone present seemed to feel Tai One's supremacy's gaze. Slowly, Tai One's supremacy said, "This time, the reopening of the spiritual sea is very likely related to the future fate of the heaven primordial world. We can only do our best." Lin Daohan, Shoichi Daishin, Xian One's supremacy, and the others all nodded. Of course. Shoichi Daishin looked at Quang Hung and said slowly, "I'll leave the divine land to you. This time, focus on the spiritual sea. As for the boundless world, don't be hasty and be patient." Quang Hung said calmly, "I understand. First, the original plan is the most important. At other times, you can take a step back. Everything will be decided after the dust of the fight for the spiritual sea has settled." His eyes became a little deep. "When necessary, we should follow Junior Brother Yan's example." Xian One's supremacy said, "In this fight for the spiritual sea, although our temple has the upper hand, the opponent is equally strong. We need to be careful. If things go wrong, activate the backup plan." Tai One's supremacy closed his eyes and looked emotionless. "In short, do your best." Everyone looked up at the void above the peak of White Cloud Mountain. There, among the thick white clouds, there was a round mirror light. It was faintly visible, as if it was connected to the heavens and the whole boundless world. In the void above the northern foothills of Kunlun Mountain, on the mysterious sky treasure tree at the peak of Jade Capital Mountain, Lin Feng sat upright silently. All the disciples had already received his orders and went to either prepare or cultivate. Lin Feng gazed at the empty space in the distance, slowly thinking in his heart, who would it be? Chapter 1383. As time passed, the day of the reopening of the Spirit Sea finally arrived. The entire great heaven primordial world gradually calmed down, as if it was the last calm before the storm. However, under the calm surface, the undercurrents were surging and would only become more intense than before. News came from the vast land of infinite wasteland that Golden Cicada, who had converted to Buddhism and had not shown himself for a long time, had suddenly reappeared and was tracked down. In the end, under the siege of the experts of the dragon race, he broke out of the encirclement and escaped far away. However, the secret key of the spirit sea that he had somehow obtained had fallen into the hands of the dragon race. When the news spread out, everyone was shocked. This meant that the dragon race was almost certain to intervene in the battle of the spirit sea. The situation of the spirit sea instantly became even more confusing and difficult to predict. However, the human cultivation world of the Divine Land, especially the Great Qin dynasty, still couldn't let their guard down. No one knew if the experts of the dragon race would set aside the spirit sea and target them and Shixingyan first. To prevent the Yudu race from getting ahead of them, Xianmen, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple would definitely rush to the spirit sea immediately. When that happened, the Divine Land would be empty, and it would be a good opportunity for the dragon race. The situation in the Great Heaven primordial world became more and more tense. On Jade Capital Mountain, Lin Feng looked at the golden mirage bead in front of him calmly. He saw a faint golden haze emerging from the bead, and there were purple flowing lights flashing in the golden haze. They became more and more dazzling and intense. It's time. Lin Feng's eyes suddenly flashed, and a Tai Chi pattern could be seen spinning in each of his pupils. He looked into the distant sky. In the eyes of others, there was nothing in the void. At that moment, in Lin Feng's eyes, he could see flowing lights shuttling back and forth, and he seemed to hear the sound of the great Tao. Behind him, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, Yu Hongyan, and Yang Qing were all waiting silently. At that moment, in the Great Heaven primordial world, all the top experts who held the secret key to the spirit sea, regardless of whether it was the Divine Land or the vast land of infinite wasteland, sensed something and became excited. The experts of the Yudu race in the Blackboard world and the experts of the Taishu Temple at the top of White Cloud Mountain had been waiting for this moment, just like Lin Feng. Lin Feng stood on a branch of the mysterious sky treasure tree and formed a spell with his left hand. His right hand stretched out and tapped the golden mirage bead that was floating in mid-air. The golden mirage bead had turned completely purple. When Lin Feng's finger touched it, a purple light shot into the sky and flew into the ethereal void. The purple light flashed and disappeared, as if it had disappearing into the void. At this time, Lin Feng retracted his left hand, the fingers of his left hand lightly tapping on his forehead, while the 5 fingers of his right hand changed, forming another spell sign. Lin Feng retracted his left hand and tapped it on his forehead. The fingers of his right hand moved and formed another spell. The black and white Tai Chi pattern, mixed with yin and yang, rotated continuously. White light shone from the center and expanded in all directions. In the end, the Tai Chi pattern disappeared and was replaced by something that looked like a cave abode and a door. The door was faintly discernible, as if it was hidden in an endless space that folded together. Around the door, a large amount of white smoke and clouds flowed continuously. Countless brilliant lights shot into the sky and intertwined with each other. As Lin Feng's right hand changed the incantation sign, he once again lightly pointed at the door. A stream of purple gas rushed out, continuously traveling upwards in the air. As the purple gas traveled, it changed continuously. Its color became fainter and fainter until it was almost transparent. However, the concept of its power became more and more mysterious. Gradually, it formed a formless, traceless, but real path. At the end of the path, it extended toward the door that seemed to be above the 9 heavens, getting higher and higher. Zhu Yi and the others stood behind Lin Feng and carefully analyzed the concept contained in this path. They all seemed to understand something. It wasn't just an extension and rise in the sense of space. It seemed to gradually surpass the general concept of this world and climb to a higher level. When the color of the purple gas completely dissipated, a mysterious path to heaven appeared between Lin Feng and his disciple and that door. Stepping on this path, everyone could clearly feel the projection of the laws of the great path appearing on their spiritual platforms. It was a memorable experience. However, at this moment, there was a hum of a sword on Jade Capital Mountain. Wherever the sword hum passed, the pleasant sound of the great path immediately faded. It was as if a sentient being had been mercilessly killed. Lin Feng laughed softly. He saw Xianli standing beside him expressionlessly. Her eyes were also staring at the door in the void. Her gaze was cold and sharp, and there was a unique aura coming from the door. Everyone's attention fell on Xianli. At this moment, the mysterious spirit sea seemed to have a life of its own. It was awakened from its slumber and looked at Xianli cautiously. As the two's auras intersected, they instantly confronted each other. It was a rivalry and hostility rooted in the source. Xianli's gaze did not have the slightest warmth. She looked at the door of the spirit sea coldly. Her gaze was like a sharp sword that pierced through the mysterious domain and went deep inside, stirring up the great path in the spirit sea. That lofty and illusory door was constantly distorting at this moment, and rays of light burst forth from it. "So, you can't go in with me this time." Lin Feng smiled and said, "Stay in the divine land." The cold light in Xian Li's eyes gradually dissipated. She regained her calmness. The fierce aura that could destroy the heavens also gradually calmed down. The door of the spirit sea on the other side of the path also gradually returned to its original state. Lin Feng looked at Xianli and said, "Grasp it carefully. I'm not by your side. You can at most use 3 swords. Remember. Xianli's usually indifferent face showed a few rare changes. The corner of her lips twitched slightly. Her eyes revealed disappointment and sadness. Actually, it should be 2 swords, because one of them is already reserved. Lin Feng smiled and continued, "Don't be disappointed. If I'm not wrong, it won't take long for you to enjoy yourself, and you'll be able to take another step forward. But before that, restrain yourself for the time being. 2 swords, remember." Hearing this, Xianli lowered her head towards Lin Feng. Her originally emotionless face, which was like a cold and exquisite doll, became a little gentler at this moment. Lin Feng looked at Shi Tianhao and Luo Qingwu on the other side and said, "You two stay in the divine land. Don't be careless." Xiao Yin and Li Yuanfang were now in the Netherworld Sea and the Yinghai Sea respectively. Shi Tianhao and Luo Qingwu both nodded in agreement. Lin Feng dusted his robe and walked up the stairs. Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, Yu Hongyan, and Yang Qing also followed him. In addition to them, there was a white tiger with a cold metallic luster following him to the spirit sea. It was the white tiger Great Sage. At this moment, the white tiger Great Sage's body was flashing with a faint platinum radiance. His ice-cold, ferocious, and murderous aura had disappeared. Apart from his outer appearance, he looked no different from an ordinary tiger. But even Zhu Yi and Wang Lin did not dare to look down on him, because at this moment, the white tiger Great Sage had passed the last tribulation and completely completed the first tribulation. He had entered the Dharma-ending realm. A pure-blooded white tiger who had entered the Dharma-ending realm was so powerful that he was one of the top big demons in the Great Tianyuan world. This time, Lin Feng chose to bring the white tiger Great Sage to the spirit sea instead of staying in the vast thousand worlds. White tiger Great Sage was very happy to do so. He might have some ideas about the spirit sea, but he would not have too many other ideas if there were no major changes when he traveled with Lin Feng. As long as Lin Feng did not fall, the white tiger Great Sage would wholeheartedly serve Xianmin Tianzong. It was thanks to Xianmin Tianzong that he had been able to pass the last tribulation smoothly all these years. To him, entering the spirit sea was more likely to meet the powerhouses of the Yudu clan. Under the circumstances where he did not have to worry about the spirit sea, this was his biggest wish. The Blackboard world was hidden and hard to find. Even if the White Tiger Great Sage wanted to raid the Yudu clan's old home, he could not do so. So, this time, entering the spirit sea with Lin Feng would give him a chance to fulfill his wish. The group of people passed through the invisible path and came to the door in the depths of the cloud sea. Then they entered in a single file. As soon as they entered the door, the vast and boundless spiritual energy, which seemed to have no end, surged toward them and surrounded them. There seemed to be something like ribbons of light in front of him, rising and falling, flashing in the void. The overly abundant spiritual energy even made one's senses numb. The scene in front of them looked rather ordinary, as if there was nothing special about it. Lin Feng and the others could not hear anything. The scene in front of them was filled with the mysterious concept of an invisible elephant, causing them to involuntarily immerse themselves in it. As expected, when Lin Feng and the others stepped into the spirit sea, the door behind them suddenly closed. A few rays of light flashed by, and 3 figures suddenly appeared in front of Lin Feng. One was a 90-foot-tall giant, which was the Nine Cheese clone. Another was a human figure dressed in silver-white scale armor with dragon horns on his head, which was the clone of Brontosaurus. The last one was a young man with vigorous vitality, which was the clone of the god of war. Beside Lin Feng, a tall figure also appeared in front of Zhu Yi. The vigorous vitality around him shook the void. It was his clone of Hao Yang. The spirit sea's great Tao returned to origin, which was mysterious and unpredictable, had now appeared again. At this moment, on the peak of White Cloud Mountain, Lord Taiwan was the leader. He closed his eyes and said slowly, "Let's move." A bright mirror hung high above his head, and it seemed to faintly resonate with the spirit sea. Behind him, Shoichi Dashin, Lord Xianwan, and Lin Daohan all nodded and followed. At this moment, in the blackboard world, black light flowed in Sun Huan Yudu's eyes. He said solemnly, "The moment has finally arrived." Behind him, a group of strong Yudu clan stared at the void. Their gazes were complicated, but more than that, they were excited. As the laws of the great Tao shook, more than one door opened, connecting the spirit sea and the universe. After opening, it closed again. Chapter 1384. Lin Feng was revisiting the spiritual sea. Apart from him, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others had also arrived. Even though they had heard Lin Feng describe the wonders of the spiritual sea, they still felt like their horizons had been widened when they put themselves in the spiritual sea. The White Tiger Great Sage had lived for a long time. He had been to the empty ocean, the star ocean, and even the Ying Ocean. However, he was still astonished when he entered the spiritual sea. Both humans and beasts could clearly sense the mysteries of the spiritual sea, especially when they comprehended the great Tao of heaven and earth that seemed to have taken shape and were like ribbons of light, which allowed them to compare with what they had learned in the past. Lin Feng said with a smile, "Take your time to figure out, but don't stop. Follow me." He took the lead, while Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others quickly followed behind him. Within the spirit sea, there was no scenery. It was empty, as if there was no direction or boundary, nor was there any sense of distance. Walking within, the scenery around him did not change at all, making people feel as if they were always in the same place and not moving. But Lin Feng, who knew what was going on, had his hands behind his back, leisurely walking forward, not caring about this. The black and white Tai Chi pattern on his forehead flickered, while the Brontosaurus clone, the Divine Battle clone, and the Nine Chi clone turned into 3 rays of light and withdrew into the Tai Chi pattern. Zhu Yi also withdrew his Hao Yang clone and followed behind Lin Feng. However, Yidao talismans appeared in his eyes, which flickered with intertwining lights. Each flicker represented an innumerable deduction. Wang Lin also followed behind Lin Feng with a calm expression. He did not ask where they were going, as he focused his attention on the great Tao in the spiritual sea. As they moved forward, Wang Lin's eyes flickered with brilliant lights, while his aura constantly changed. At times, it was normal, and at other times there was a strong surge of qi and blood. Compared to before, although Wang Lin's body was also exuding a powerful aura that shook the void, it only came from his head and torso. His arms and legs didn't reveal any aura at all, as if they were completely separated from his head and torso. Yu Hongyan's movements seemed ordinary, but with each step he took, his acupoints opened and closed. Each acupoint seemed to be connecting with him with the brilliance of the great Tao. As for Yangqing's eyes, one of them was black while the other was white. However, the black and white were constantly changing. While the white tiger great sage was observing the scenery of the spiritual sea, the white tiger great sage's eyes became more dazzling. The cold metallic luster flowed endlessly like water. The more they moved forward, the more transparent light ribbons appeared. They gradually filled the void and intertwined with each other. But looking at these dense light ribbons, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others frowned. There seems to be a sense of disorder. It is not as mysterious and natural as the thousands of great Tao in the spiritual sea. These great Tao laws feel incomplete. Lin Feng smiled. Yes, it is. It is also because of this that the time it takes for us to refine the spiritual sea has been greatly reduced. Otherwise, there might not be much progress in thousands or even tens of thousands of years. He did not stop walking. As he spoke, he continued to move forward. The others followed behind him. After walking for an unknown period of time, they saw a faint flash of light at the end of the void. Everyone's eyes lit up. At the end of the world, there was a sea of light covering everything, as if it had encompassed the entire world of the spiritual sea. The place under everyone's feet seemed to be the boundary between two different worlds. On one side was the empty world of the spiritual sea, and on the other side was an ocean composed entirely of light. Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others subconsciously looked back. It was empty in front of them, and their vision was unobstructed. The concept of distance and space seemed to be completely non-existent. It seemed that things that were far away should be clearly visible. But in the world of the spiritual sea in front of them, there seemed to be only a group of people. Not only were the enchantress and the others nowhere to be seen, but the strong practitioners of the Taishu Temple and the great demons of the Yudu clan were also nowhere to be seen. Everyone turned back to look in front of them. There was a blur in front of them, and both their vision and consciousness were blocked. They could not see the scene in the spiritual sea at all. Seeing the confusion in Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others, Lin Feng said, "The others are on the other side of the spiritual sea. Everyone who enters this place through different doors will see the same scene in front of them. In the empty world, there seems to be only themselves, and they can't see the other people who entered the spiritual sea." Lin Feng's gaze also landed on the spiritual sea in front of them. Our sect, Taishu Temple, and the Yudu clan can easily find this place. But for people like the enchantress who only have the secret key, they will have to spend some effort to find this spiritual sea. Xianmin Tianzong, Taishu Temple, and the Yudu clan had the highest possibility of obtaining the spiritual sea. This wasn't just empty talk, and it wasn't just a simple advantage in refining. Compared to the other powers that had entered the spiritual sea, Lin Feng and the others were ahead in all aspects. Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others were deep in thought. The Yi Dao talismans in Zhu Yi's eyes flashed continuously, and he felt the fog in front of him gradually dissipate. The scenes of light became clearer and clearer. This spiritual sea is the source of the light bands reflected by the incomplete great Tao in the spiritual sea. This is a damaged part of the spiritual sea. Whoever can repair this damage will have successfully refined the spiritual sea. Wang Lin looked at the sea of light in front of him, then at the spirit sea world behind him, and said in a low voice, "As the damage is gradually repaired, the sea of light in front of us will gradually disappear, and the space-time of the spirit sea world will also change accordingly. It is as if the different worlds will gradually merge and merge into one again. At that time, the different powers that have entered the spiritual sea will be able to interact with each other." His gaze turned slightly cold. At that time, the process of repairing the damage and eliminating the spiritual sea will also reach the final moment. That is the truly crucial moment. Yu Hongyin said, "Therefore, they can attack each other. The first to enter may not be able to laugh in the end, but the one who previously repaired the spiritual sea the most will still have the most advantage, and may even be able to use the power of the spiritual sea to suppress others to a certain extent. When experts fight, they only fight for a single line. Moreover, the power of the spiritual sea is vast and boundless. Even if it is only a small amount of power, it is still quite impressive." Yang Qing looked at Lin Feng. "Master, when everyone works together to repair this spiritual sea, can they also wrestle with each other through the spiritual sea?" "That's right." As Lin Feng spoke, he had already stretched out his right hand and pressed it on the overwhelming and boundless light in front of him. Actually, it is not just a wrestling. Right now, this spiritual sea in front of us is different from the last time I entered. The method of repairing is different, and the characteristics are also different. As we wrestle with each other, we can even project our own power to a limited extent and fight with others in this spiritual sea. Of course, it is the same for the other people on the other side. At this moment, under the illumination of the light, Lin Feng's right hand seemed to be transparent. On that translucent jade-like palm, purple talismans and divine patterns continuously appeared, forming many incantations. Like meridians and bones, they flowed endlessly in Lin Feng's palm. However, that is after all a small path. In order to repair the spiritual sea in front of us, we have to focus on the spiritual sea itself. Lin Feng's left hand kept changing the incantation gestures. Taiji patterns rotated in his eyes, and a golden pearl that flashed with purple light appeared. It was the heavenly scarlet golden pearl. Large amounts of purple light surged out of the heavenly scarlet golden pearl, surging majestically and entering the spiritual sea in front of them. And above Lin Feng's head, the melodious sound of a bell rang in the void. It was as if the first existence that existed at the beginning of heaven and earth was playing out the changes of creation and the chaos of the universe. The bell of good fortune appeared above Lin Feng's head and then landed beside Lin Feng. Above the ancient bell, a figure of light gradually appeared. It was a handsome middle-aged man with a jade-like face, a calm and reserved appearance. His temples were slightly stained with frost, and he was precisely the manifestation of the bell of good fortune's magic treasure, origin spirit. The bell reverberated incessantly, condensing into ripples that seemed substantial. These ripples strengthened Lin Feng's body, and they followed him into the spiritual sea in front of them. Zhu Yi and Wang Lin also took a step forward. They each stretched out their palms and placed them on the boundless spiritual sea in front of them, immersing their minds in it. In the next moment, the two of them manifested their return to void Dharma bodies at the same time. Zhu Yi's 30-foot-tall return to void Dharma body held an ancient scroll in one hand and stretched out the other. The Tai Chi pattern on his forehead rotated incessantly, and a huge Tao-changing talisman hovered in the air above his head, flashing brilliantly. On the other hand, Wang Lin's return to void stage physique seemed to have changed from before. His limbs were like shadows of light, while his head and torso were jet black. He looked very similar to his great devil Lord Xian Shen clone. The difference was on his forehead. Wang Lin's forehead was not like the great demon avatars, where there was a crack in demonic runes. Instead, there was a Taiji diagram that was no different from Zhu Yi's. Furthermore, Wang Lin's eyes were the same as before. They were like two sparkling crystals like mirrors. Countless lights and shadows flickered on the surface of the mirror, displaying the past, present, and future. However, these things were constantly fluctuating between certainty and uncertainty, filled with a sense of absurdity and mystery. Yu Hongyin and Yang Qing also took a step forward and stretched out their palms to touch the spiritual sea. For them, although their cultivation levels could not be compared to their master and senior brother, they were still far beyond the reach of ordinary primordial spirit embodiment stage cultivators. To them, this sea of light was a rare experience that they could not afford to miss. White Tiger Great Sage did not step forward. Instead, he lay down quietly beside Lin Feng and watched them silently. As Lin Feng and the others moved, the sea of light in front of them gradually began to ripple, and the world of the spiritual sea behind them also began to surge with spiritual qi. Lin Feng's mind was connected with the sea of light at this moment. Everything in front of him was dazzling, and he could not see anything else. But soon, the scene gradually changed. In the boundless sea of light, Lin Feng could vaguely see a bright mirror light emerging, and at the same time, an illusory pitch-black sun slowly rising. Chapter 1385. Looking at the mirror light and the pitch-black sun, Lin Feng's lips curled into a faint smile. In the mirror light, white clouds could be faintly seen, and under the cover of the pitch-black sun, different colors of light could be seen flowing nonstop. That mirror light was naturally the light of the Haotian mirror, and that pitch-black sun was the manifestation of the demon power of the 12 illusory suns, the current clan master of Yudu race. At that moment, in the eyes of the people of Taishu Temple and the Yudu race, different scenes appeared. In the eyes of the people of Taishu Temple, there was also a pitch-black sun rising. Other than that, there was a purple auspicious cloud, and in the purple auspicious cloud, there seemed to be different scenes emerging. In the eyes of the strong practitioners of Yudu race, they saw the purple auspicious cloud and the bright mirror light. The three parties looked at the scene in front of them and knew that it was the result of the magic power or demon power of the opponent pouring into the sea of light. However, no matter if it was Lin Feng, the cultivators of Taishu Temple, or the Yudu race, they didn't attack each other first. Instead, they placed their attention on the sea of light in front of them. Under the guidance of their magic power divine arts, the boundless spirit qi in the spirit sea formed a huge wave that surged towards the sea of light. At that moment, the sea of light seemed to have become a bottomless abyss, swallowing all the spirit qi that surged in. Not even a wave could be made. However, the expressions of Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the rest changed slightly. They could faintly feel that the sea of light seemed to have dimmed slightly. In terms of spatial distance, the sea of light in front of them seemed to be slowly shrinking. The extent of its shrinking was very small, and the speed was very slow, but it was actually changing. Even the world of the spirit sea that everyone was in seemed to be changing. Streams of light that manifested from the great Tao stretched out from within and hung down like silk ribbons, wrapping around the bodies of Lin Feng and his disciple. These lights gave off a feeling of being incomplete, broken, and disorderly. However, as time passed, they gradually became complete again. Then, they separated from everyone's bodies and drifted into the spirit sea in the distance. Then, they disappeared into the vast void without a trace. But between heaven and earth, the brilliance of the great path gradually became dazzling and indistinct. From the sea of light, a brand new brilliance of the great path would emerge and continue to wrap around Lin Feng and his disciple. Lin Feng and the others were already sitting cross-legged in the empty void, facing the seemingly boundless sea of light. At this moment, the bell of good fortune had already shed its original appearance. Instead, it had revealed its second manifestation, the river of time. The huge, ancient bell transformed into a gurgling river that flowed endlessly. It was long and full of vicissitudes. It was like the long river of time that washed over all things. The river of time surrounded Lin Feng and the others, flowing unceasingly. It was as if heaven and earth were changing because of it. The sea of light and the world of the spirit sea were like two different worlds. Under the operation of Lin Feng's supernatural power, the river of time turned into a boundary, causing the world that Lin Feng and his disciple were in to seem to be separated from the spirit sea and the sea of light, becoming a third world. But this world was closely connected to the world of the spirit sea and the sea of light. The boundary between the boundaries was extremely blurred. The three seemed to form a mysterious balance, and they were mutually connected. As time passed, the appearance of the sea of light in front of Lin Feng gradually changed. The brilliance it emitted gradually turned purple. Streams of purple light constantly shuttled back and forth in the sea of light. Their number increased, and they became denser and denser. The overall purple light also seemed to become thicker and thicker, as if it was going to dye the entire sea of light purple. At the same time, in the world of the spirit sea that the cultivators of Taishu Temple were in, the sea of light in front of them also gradually became like the light of a Haotian mirror. It was clear and tranquil, without any waves. It was like the surface of a mirror. Meanwhile, the sea of light in front of the strong practitioners of Yuta race was dyed black. In the black sea of light, large amounts of god markings appeared, as if there were bubbles rising in the water. Lin Feng's eyes were closed, and his expression was at ease. He could feel that his side, Taishu Temple, and Yuta race were all using their own supernatural power and willpower to infect the sea of light in front of them. Meanwhile, the sea of light that represented the gap in the spirit sea was gradually shrinking in size. In the sea of light, in the center of the area that the three sides occupied, there was a core that was also forming, turning from illusion to reality. From the illusory level, it was transitioning into something real. In the center of his area, a purple auspicious cloud was gradually growing. The auspicious cloud was becoming more and more condensed, becoming more and more real. Even though it still looked like an illusory cloud without a fixed form, it was already in existence that it stepped into the real world. The area that the three sides occupied continued to expand, and the borders of the areas were also gradually getting closer. In Lin Feng's consciousness, the 8 trigrams had laid down the foundation of creation. The 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind were in a mess, and then they stabilized once again, deducing the phenomenon of creation. Everything transformed into the path of yin and yang, one black and one white flowing continuously. The path of creation alternated between going forward and going backward, repeating the cycle. On top of his head, a light shadow lit up. It seemed to be only 3 yards in radius, like a canopy, but there were all kinds of principles deduced within, making it too much for the eyes to take in. Billions of formation markings interweaved continuously, and it was the formation of yin and yang life and death. In the formation of yin and yang life and death, there was a huge and majestic palace that looked like the residence of a god king in the heavens. It was shrouded in layers of light, and even if one couldn't see it clearly, one could feel the overbearing and awe-inspiring concept of power within. The Taiji diagram on Lin Feng's forehead spun continuously, and streams of light poured out from it, landing in the sea of light in front of him. As time passed, the aura on his body became more and more profound, giving people a feeling that it was unfathomable. And the river of time that flowed around his body also became more and more profound. The direction of the river could not be seen, and its source could not be identified. It was as if it was engraved in time, and it was difficult to define its length and position. But there was a middle-aged man sitting in the river, giving people a feeling that this man was sitting in the middle of the river of time. No matter how much time flowed, he would not move. This man was the original spirit of the Bell of Fate, Fate Creation Boy. But at this moment, it was difficult to call him a boy. Not only did he look like a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s, but his appearance was still changing, and he was slowly aging. As Lin Feng and the others continued to replenish and refine the spiritual sea, time continued to pass. In the end, although Fate Creation Boy was still wearing a black and white Taoist robe, his appearance had changed into that of an old man. Although he looked thin and hale and hardy, his hair and beard were all white, and he looked old. Only his eyes contained many characteristics of an infant, a teenager, and a middle-aged man at the same time, making it impossible to tell his age. Beside Lin Feng, his disciples were also gradually changing. Zhu, he manifested his Dharmakaya of void return. He looked calm and peaceful, but the golden bridge of the Nirvana realm had already appeared below him. On the golden bridge, many lights and shadows gradually emerged, and they were all sages and great scholars from ancient times to the present. The sound of reading was endless, and gradually it was no longer limited to the sound of reading. It became more and more noisy, and all kinds of voices could be heard. But the golden bridge of the Nirvana realm's magnificent willpower and spirit became purer and more condensed. Besides the original 8 halos on the golden bridge of the Nirvana realm, the 9th halo also began to appear slowly. On the other side, Wang Lin's change was even more obvious. His mirror-like eyes became more and more dazzling, and his head gradually began to change back to the original Dharmakaya of void return. It was no longer like the incarnation of the great devil, which exuded a strong power of chi and blood that was like the life and death of the universe from his acupoints. His torso was also showing the same changes, but all the power of chi and blood was converging towards a point in his body, and that was where his heart was. When Wang Lin's Dharmakaya of void return was first formed, his heart was in the shape of his spiritual power mystique, Emperor Yan's Hall. But now Wang Lin stood in the void, his 4 limbs spread out. His left leg turned into layers of light, and within the light, there was a huge black palace. It was Emperor Yan's Hall. The doors of Emperor Yan's Hall opened, and other than the 2 wheels of light, one black and one white, there was a figure sitting on the throne. He was wearing a black dragon robe and had a flat crown on his head, just like the Lord of Hell. That figure had the same facial features as Wang Lin, but he was cold and dignified and looked down on all life. On his forehead, there was a vertical demonic mark, just like the incarnation of the great devil. On the other side, Wang Lin's right leg also turned into layers of light, and within the light, there was a black stone bridge. It seemed to have existed since ancient times and would never be destroyed. The bridge connected life and death, ghosts and gods, yin and yang, and heaven and earth. On the stone bridge, a man in green stood. He looked ordinary and leisurely, but he also looked like Wang Lin. It was just that compared to the Lord of Hell in Emperor Yan's Hall, this Wang Lin looked much kinder. He had a smile on his face, and the only thing that stood out was that there was also a vertical demonic mark on his forehead. Wang Lin's left and right hands respectively turned into the Yellow Springs Road and the River of Forgetfulness. On the road and in the river, there was also a Wang Lin. The Wang Lin on the road did not look like an adult, but a youth, stubborn and ordinary, and walked alone. The Wang Lin in the river was expressionless, his eyes closed. He was like a stubborn rock in the Yellow Springs River, motionless and silent. And these 2 Wang Lins also had a vertical demonic mark on their foreheads. The head of Wang Lin, who had manifested his void return physique, was no longer emitting any power of chi and blood. Instead, it was gradually turning into a hazy glow. In that glow, the mirror-like stone of 3 lives flickered and gradually took shape. In the spirit's sea, there were 3 parties fighting, but there was no anger. However, everyone knew that this was just the calm before the storm. Very quickly, new changes occurred. Whether it was Lin Feng and his disciple, or the people of Taishu Temple and the experts of the Yuta tribe, all of them felt it. Others had already come to the shore of the Sea of Light and interacted with it. Chapter 1386. Lin Feng closed his eyes, and a different scene appeared in his sea of consciousness. Apart from the bright mirror light and the pitch-black sun, a dark cloud appeared. The cloud stretched and changed, gradually expanding and evolving from an illusory shadow to a real cloud. Soon after, a golden brilliance flashed. As the golden brilliance condensed, it gradually turned into a Buddha, filling the surroundings as if it was everywhere. However, unlike the rapidly expanding dark clouds, the changes to the Buddha didn't seem to be obvious. When Lin Feng saw this scene, his heart stirred slightly. Future glazed Buddha, what is he thinking? The dark cloud was naturally the manifestation of the enchantress's demonic power divine sense, while the Buddha's shadow was the projection of the future glazed Buddha's dermic power divine sense. According to the news circulating in the Tianyuan Great World, the dragon race's secret key to the spirit sea was obtained from Golden Cicada. As for Golden Cicada, not long after the future glazed Buddha was born in the war between the two worlds, he had gone to the east to meet the Buddha. With the future glazed Buddha's help to conceal the karma and heavenly secrets, Golden Cicada's whereabouts became even more secretive, making it difficult for others to find him. Not only could the other demons not find him, even with Lin Feng's help and the Golden Cicada's rope in hand, the monkey, who had previously chased Golden Cicada to the point where he could only flee, could not find any traces of Golden Cicada. He could only give up gloomily. Lin Feng had always felt that there was something strange about the dragon race being able to intercept Golden Cicada. Now, it seemed even more intriguing. The future glazed Buddha had at least 2 of the secret keys to the spirit sea. And from that Buddha silhouette, even though it's hard to tell just what level he's reached right now, Lin Feng can faintly feel that ever since he was born, the future Buddha Lord's strength has always been rapidly increasing. His cultivation level has already caught up to his current body. The future body of the Buddha was supposed to be an existence even more powerful than his current body. The mysterious and unfathomable part of it was to subdue the Dharma and establish the Dharma. However, the actual combat aspect of this technique, the birth of a future self, was not something that could be easily achieved. Even the Buddha himself had to transform the past, future, and present into the heavens and earth in order to achieve this. Furthermore, because of Lin Feng, there were some deviations. As a result, it was very difficult for this future body of the Buddha to truly surpass his current body. But even with that being the case, the current future constellation, Glazed Buddha Master, was far from comparable to when he had first been born. However, his current actions were rather abnormal. The future Glazed Buddha Master didn't seem to care about the spirit sea that everyone was fighting for. Instead, he seemed to be patiently waiting for something. Lin Feng frowned slightly and opened his eyes. His pupils were like the deep universe, and there were rays of light constantly intertwining and flickering in them. Although he had the key to the spiritual sea, the possibility that the Yuan Dragon King had not entered the spiritual sea was within Lin Feng's expectations. The spiritual ocean was of utmost importance, but it was not impossible for the Dragon Clan to choose to enter the Divine Land and sweep through the Great Qin Empire. Although the Great Qin Empire had the intention to hide Shi Xingyun's situation, and Xianmin Tianzong didn't make it public, the news still spread. Her mother and brother, Shi Chongyun, were both in the Great Qin Empire. If the Great Qin Empire was in danger, Shi Xingyun would most likely choose to rush to West Hill City. Compared to the Great Qin Empire, she was the Dragon Clan's primary target. However, it wouldn't be easy for the Dragon Clan to have their way if Xian Li stayed in the Divine Land. If they wanted to succeed, they would need a lot of planning. Seeing that things couldn't be done, the Yuan Dragon King would still choose to enter the spiritual ocean. As Lin Feng was thinking, he suddenly had a thought. In his divine sense, he suddenly saw a ball of light appearing in the sea of light in front of him. Looking closely, the ball of light was like a stubborn rock that existed in the void. It was difficult to tell which direction was up, down, left, and right. This stubborn rock gave off a feeling that it was indestructible and would never yield. It looked like a rock that didn't move, but exuded a rebellious and lawless spirit. This feeling, is it that monkey? Lin Feng's eyes narrowed. He's here too. At this moment, in one of the worlds in the spiritual ocean, a human-sized figure that looked like an ordinary monkey stood up and stood alone in front of the sea of light. This monkey stretched out a furry claw and pressed it on the sea of light in front of him. At the same time, he looked around and sized up the spiritual ocean behind him. A smile appeared on his furry face. Interesting. This place is interesting. Let me have some fun too. The others who were trying to refine the spiritual ocean also paid attention to that stubborn rock and felt the demonic power within it. Some people found it very unfamiliar and couldn't figure it out for a while. Others reacted like Lin Feng. It's that infinite law, inner monkey. Although the monkey hadn't appeared in the world for a long time, and every time he did, it was like a startled swan. However, the commotion he caused was not small. In the past few years, he had been chasing after golden cicada everywhere, turning the entire vast Tianhuang land upside down. There was no peace. However, no one was happy about his participation, including Lin Feng. This is a completely unstable factor. Lin Feng raised his eyebrows slightly. Although he had helped the monkey remove the band-tightening curse back then, and the two of them had formed some good karma, even if the monkey wanted to return the favor, it would not be on a matter like the Battle of the Spiritual Ocean. On the contrary, if Lin Feng gained the upper hand in refining the spiritual ocean, then the monkey was more likely to cause trouble and obstruct him. This had nothing to do with favors. No matter who it was difficult to sit back and watch Xianmin Tianzong, who had occupied the divine land and was almost the #1 force in the Tian Yuan school, refine the spiritual ocean. Not to mention that the monkey is a person who is used to being wild. Even if he has the intention to help Lin Feng, it's hard to say what the result will be. Lin Feng shook his head and continued to focus on filling up the sea of light. Although the others were secretly paying attention to the monkey's arrival, they did not stop what they were doing. Now is not the time to fight. Before the real fight, everyone should first accumulate the chips in their hands and seize the upper hand. Beside Lin Feng, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and the others also sensed the monkey's arrival. After a slight change in their expressions, they calmed down and focused on the matter at hand. The ninth circle of light on the Permitha Golden Bridge under Zhu Yi's feet became clearer and more condensed. As for the head of Wang Lin's void return body, it had completely turned into layers of light. Within the light, an existence that resembled the three-life stone was gradually taking shape. Within the three-life stone, three figures were gradually reflected. They seemed to be fused together, but they seemed to be in three different time and space, respectively in the past, present, and future. Wang Lin's torso also turned into light and shadow, and there was no longer exuding exuberant qi and blood. All the qi and blood power that originated from the great devil avatar was now gathered at his heart. At this moment, every beat of Wang Lin's heart was like the creation of a universe, from creation to destruction. An extremely majestic power was emitted from it. That pitch-black heart seemed to contain the extreme evils of the universe, causing one's heart to palpitate and fear involuntarily. Beside Zhu Yi and Wang Lin, Yu Hongyan sat cross-legged. One of her hands reached forward to touch the sea of light, while the other hand formed a seal and placed her palm vertically on her chest. The spots of light that flickered on her body were not attached to the outside. Instead, they were emitted from within her body. Those spots of light were like spots of starlight that flickered continuously, shooting out from the acupoints all over Yu Hongyan's body. Every acupoint was like a star that flickered with shocking light continuously. They contained a majestic qi and blood power of the physical body that was as great as the power of the stars. With every breath that Yu Hongyan took, the starlight flickered, and her power seemed to increase. As time passed, the strength of the qi and blood of Yu Hongyan's physical body was actually close to the state that Shi Tianhao had when he was at the peak of the primordial soul incarnation realm. Before Shi Tianhao, there had never been a human martial adept who had ever reached such a height. Yang Qing's aura seemed to be much more tranquil. Similarly, she sat cross-legged in the void. Black and white intertwined and circulated in her eyes. Around her body, there were also two clouds, one black and one white, constantly rotating. This scene was somewhat similar to the powerful adepts of the Taishu Temple after they had cultivated the void yin-yang way to the great success stage. But the concept of power and the aura of spiritual power were different. On the surface of Yang Qing's body, There was a faint layer of purple light that was bright and translucent like a crystal. The Tai Chi pattern on his forehead was constantly rotating. The sea of light continued to churn and roar, and its scale was gradually shrinking. In the sea of light, the areas occupied by the various forces were constantly getting closer, until finally they gradually connected. The spiritual chi in the spirit sea, heaven and earth, continued to gather, pouring into the sea of light. The scene in front of everyone in different worlds was the same. The void was constantly changing, and different worlds were about to overlap. When the spiritual chi tide subsided, the sea of light would also collapse to its limit. At the same time, the void of the heavens and earth would merge, and everyone would be gathered together. But before the spiritual chi tide completely subsided, in the sea of light, the various forces that had already come into contact with each other and had long been waiting for this moment broke the silence at the same time. A violent storm broke out in an instant. Everyone wanted to take advantage of this final moment to seize the initiative as much as possible. The pitch-black sun was the first to shine brightly. The black sunlight shrouded the heavens and spread out in all directions. The purple auspicious cloud formed by Lin Feng's spiritual power and consciousness, the bright mirror light formed by the Taishu temple, the stubborn stone formed by the monkey's demonic power and consciousness, and the dark cloud formed by the enchantress's demonic power and consciousness, all spread out in all directions at the same time. And among all these forces, the most eye-catching one was the bright mirror light that belonged to the Taishu temple. A bright mirror hung high in the void, illuminating the entire sea of light. Streams of light seemed to be emitted from the edges of the mirror light, spreading out in all directions. And in the sea of light, streams of light also appeared and merged with the mirror light, causing the mirror light to seem to be the center of the entire sea of light. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.